Hello friends, book lovers, and whoever else is watching this. I'm Emily at Midnight. Welcome to my channel. I just finished watching Wicked Part 2 for good, and I've been thinking, everyone's talking about how it's an adaptation of a play, but no one's talking about the book. That's right, folks. Wicked, the play, is an adaptation of the book Wicked. That makes Wicked, the movie, an adaptation of a play that's an adaptation of a book that's inspired by yet another book that's been made into hundreds of movies. So that basically makes this part 2 of an adaptation of an adaptation of an inspiration. And why aren't we talking about that? I think that's one of the most interesting parts of this movie, of this story that we're watching. There are so many layers of inspiration and of deviation as people make their own takes of the same story. So I want to use this video as an opportunity to talk about the movie and the play as relevant, and also I want to talk about the book. Let's talk a little bit about the movies, okay? Based on movie 1, they seem to be based very faithfully upon the play. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it. I did see it on Broadway. It was so fun. I really, really enjoyed it. Definitely one of my favorite musical experiences I have ever been to. And now we have the movie adaptations with Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo. Before I get into my specific thoughts about the two-parter movie, we do know it's been split into two. In fact, movie 1 in this series is a little bit longer than the runtime of the play originally. We've seen with part 1 that a lot of the padding was in the form of beautiful shots and various things that they couldn't do on a stage. And a lot of it is also drawing out the songs, adding a little bit of song here and there. But for the most part, part 1 followed pretty faithfully to the play. But the play before Intermission, I believe, is a lot longer than the play after Intermission, so I was very interested in how they might supplement the story. I don't want to say pad, because hopefully they will be adding to the story in interesting ways. And I had my suspicions on how they might approach this. So let's go to me at the movie theater telling you what I think will be added into Wicked Part 2 for good, and then we'll see if I was right.
This movie is almost 2.5 hours long, and judging from the first movie, there's not a lot of story left. How do you think they're going to pad the extra runtime?
Okay, I have a couple thoughts about this. I think probably the least likely, but would be quite interesting to me, is I think they could include Elphaba's time with the Vinkus people in the West. She spends a lot of time there in the book, and it isn't touched on in the play at all, and I think it would be interesting for them to do that. So that's option number 1. I think that's probably the least likely. Another option is they might put in the chapel scene that we get in the book, where Elphaba runs, well, Fiyero. Okay, enough of that. They could put in the chapel scene where Fiyero runs into Elphaba in a chapel and she pretends to not be her, and he's like, obviously you're the only green person I know. So I think that's a possibility, and I think that would be a very fun scene, and that kind of starts their adult romance. So I'm curious if they'll put that in there. Another option is they might show more of her time as sort of a subversive character in the Emerald City, trying to fight for animal rights and such. I think that would be a really interesting way to take this, so I personally think that's probably the most likely way that they'll fill out more of this time. But another option that maybe even more likely than that, but I think would be slightly less interesting, would be if they were to put in a lot of the original Wizard of Oz storyline that we see little glimpses of in the play version. So we'll see which one I'm right about. I might be wrong about all of them, but we'll see.
Those were my predictions. We'll discuss whether I was right or wrong in the section about the second movie. Before we dive into the actual story, though, I do want to talk a little bit about the influence that Wicked has had. Wicked has been one of the most successful Broadway shows. It's definitely one of the more well-known Broadway musicals, and now it's getting a film adaptation. But that is by far not the only influence that this play has had, or that this story has had. Wicked, the play, came out in, I believe, 2009.
2004.
And it had a huge impact on modern media and the kinds of stories that we tell. See, Wicked was the trendsetter of a new movement of telling stories from the classic villain perspective. Whether it be someone who is secretly not a villain, but just someone going through hard times, or someone who is just very much the villain and we get to see their story, Wicked did it first and set this trend. Other stories that came after, usually in the form of movies, are things like Oz the Great and Powerful, that's set in the same context, so that I feel like the connection's really strong there. But things that we might not think of, Maleficent, Cruella, the Joker, all of those were influenced by Wicked. Whether or not the directors say they were directly influenced, it was a movement that was started by Wicked. So this is definitely a story that has had wide impacts on modern media that we consume today. So it's definitely one that is worth diving into and seeing where it came from. So let's talk about it. Before we dive into the specifics of what the book, the movie, and the play do differently story-wise, let's talk about some general background differences. One of the big differences that we have from book to play is the emphasis on geography. See, Wicked, the book, took the geography that was given to us in The Wizard of Oz, just very like casually thrown at us of like, oh yeah, and then there's these other places around the Emerald City, and Wicked expounded a lot on them. And there is, in my edition, which is Wicked and Son of a Witch bound together. I got it at Barnes & Noble. I don't think it's a Barnes & Noble edition. Yeah, this is just a HarperCollins special edition, and it is beautiful, by the way. I love it. But anyway, in my edition, I have a map in the end papers, and I'll put it up on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. But as for the book, the geography actually is pretty relevant in fun ways, so let's talk a little bit about it. As I said, this is geography given to us in The Wizard of Oz, just sort of casually in throwaway comments. And so I always love to see how Gregory Maguire used pieces from The Wizard of Oz in his creation of Wicked. It follows the story of The Wizard of Oz very, very closely, and then the play deviates from it just a little bit, but we'll get to that. So in the center of the map, we have the Emerald City, and to the north of that, we have Gillikeen, and that is the province that has Shiz, which is the school that they go to in Wicked, and so that is a region of people who are known to be like scholars and more wealthy, and that's the people in that region. Then to the east, we have Munchkin Land, and that is where all of the farms are, and the people there are a little bit shorter. This is a question that I had watching The Wizard of Oz and watching the play Wicked. I was like, are Munchkins human, or are they like halflings or dwarves or hobbits or some elves? Are they human or aren't they? I wasn't entirely sure, but they are. They're totally human. They're just a little bit shorter, and I don't remember any particular description of them in Wicked about whether they had red curly hair or anything, but I think that's been a pretty common way to portray them, and we see that in the Wicked play and movie. Also, just so you know, I will probably be referring to the play and movie interchangeably and mean that I'm referring to both unless I specify, because in a lot of ways they follow each other hand in hand. Alright, then looking to the south, we have Quadling Country, which is a swampy area with people that are generally looked down on by other regions, and I believe the reason is that the swamps make it more difficult to build structures and like cities and stuff, and so they're viewed as less civilized. So they also talk with like their own vernacular, and so they're viewed as less civilized, to put it terribly. And then we have the Vinkus to the west, and they are described as having dark skin and being pastoral. The like peasants among them tend to be nomadic, although there are keeps and cities and royalty and such that are less nomadic, but even the young people of the royalty are raised hunting. So that is the Vinkus people. I think they're originally called Winky in The Wizard of Oz, and then they're called Vinkus here. I'm not sure if Vinkus shows up in The Wizard of Oz, but in the book, it's basically a slur to call them Winkies. And there is a poem in Wicked that kind of illustrates some of these differences between the people and just gives you an idea of how people are viewed in this society, and I'm gonna read it to you. Gillikinese are sharp as knives, Munchkinlanders lead corny lives. Gillikins beat their ugly wives, Winkies swarm in stinky hives. But Quadlings, oh the Quadlings, slimy, stupid, curse at godlings, eat their young and bury their old a day before their bodies get cold. Give me an apple and I'll say it again. And we can ignore the Gillikins in that. They're technically on the map and they are in that poem, but they are not relevant to the story at all. So put them out of your mind. Gillikins are the G name that it matters here. All right, as for the play and the movie, the geography doesn't matter that much. We do have the cardinal directions of Wicked Witch of the West, Wicked Witch of the East, but the regions and the people that inhabit them just aren't as relevant. And this is a change that makes a lot of sense to me, because if you're telling such a huge story, like, this is a decent sized book. I mean, don't be fooled by the size of my bound version. This is 2 books, but the book itself is decent sized. And if you're trying to condense that into a musical that you can put on Broadway, there are a lot of things you have to cut, and geography is just not that essential of a part. So I understand that cut being made. But I do really like the way that the book chooses to use these geographical regions, because then the Wicked Witch of the West, the Wicked Witch of the East, the Good Witch of the North, they are relevant to cardinal directions and the people that they're connected to. And so I think that's a super interesting aspect of the book, and it is a bit of a shame to lose that piece of flavor in the play and movie, but it's also totally understandable. Another big difference from book to play is that there's a completely different treatment of animals, and I'm not talking about the animal rights trend throughout the play that is sort of a stand-in for human rights in a lot of ways. That's definitely from the book. But in the book, there are 2 distinct types of animals. Well, first we have humans, and then we have animals and animals. And if it sounds like I said the same thing, but just with emphasis, it's because that's what I did. See, in the book, they use capitalization to refer to the animals that can speak, that wear clothes, that interact with the same society as the humans. And then there is a other subset of the same breeds of animals and same families of animals that don't speak and don't appear to have consciousness and don't wear clothes, don't interact in society, they're more wild. And having these 2 layers of animals and animals, which is very confusing if you're listening to the audiobook. I switched to reading physically for that reason, because the audiobook narrator doesn't do a good job of emphasizing animals and animals, because it's hard to emphasize. By the way, I didn't read the Cynthia Erivo version. That's an abridged version, and I wanted to read the whole story, so I read the older audiobook. But I think this extra layer of having animals and animals is super interesting in how this book is told and the stories that it's telling, because there's this whole element of research. See, Dr. Dillamond in the book isn't a history professor, he's a biology professor, and he's trying to figure out the differences between humans, animals, and animals. It's so interesting, like, he's in the middle of making the microscope to try and examine cells, and so the conversation that they're having is, I feel like, one step further than the one that we're having about ourselves and animals, because we as humans, like, we know we're mammals, we know that we're, animals, we're great apes, we're in those families, but we do kind of consider ourselves a group apart from the other animals, because we're humans, it's this cognitive bias that we have, but also we have a wider grasp of language and communication. We have a wider grasp of tools, and, like, to an insane degree, I'm talking to you through a camera right now. Like, we as humankind created this, and that's a huge difference between us and the other animals around us. But does that mean that they don't have consciousness? Many animals do have forms of language that is a little bit more varied than we think it is. And so, if we're looking at our household dog and cat, can you really say they aren't conscious? These are the conversations that we're having right now, right? And in Wicked, they're having just one step further, because they do have these animals that have the same grasp of language and society and tool use. And so what does set the humans, the animals, and the animals apart? It's super interesting and just really such a fun philosophical question, because we do have several debates between Elphaba and her friends about this sort of thing. I think it's a super interesting layer to the book that is lost a little bit in translation with the play and the movie. There is just one type of animal. Theoretically, all animals can speak, all animals can interact in society, and it's just whether or not the humans are going to allow them to, right? And so we do lose a lot of that nuance when you shave off an entire species of animals, I suppose. But again, there's a lot of things happening in this story, and so it makes sense to kind of lose that in an adaptation. Another huge foundational difference is that at the time of Elphaba's birth, The wizard is not there. They have an Ozma regent, and the Yellow Brick Road is already getting made across the country, and then the wizard shows up sometime between her birth and her going to college. We don't know exactly when, but he takes over, he deposes the regent, and continues the production of the Yellow Brick Road, and starts implementing various anti-animal policies. All right, I'll get through these really fast, I promise. But one of the other differences between the book and the play and movie is that the play and movie has all of this like congratulations and scandalocious and all of those fun mispronounced words that I really, really like.
Scandalocious. Congratulations.
And that's actually something that the playwrights came up with. That is not present in the book at all. And good on them, because it creates this really unique flavor to Wicked that exists only in Wicked, the play and movie. And it's super interesting and fun to hear. And I just think that sort of creativity and ingenuity really makes Wicked as the play stand apart. Then we have the points of view. This is a really interesting thing to me because this book, Wicked, is split up into 5 sections. The 5 parts are Munchkinlanders, Gillikeen, the City of Emeralds, In the Vinkus, and Murder and Its Afterlife. That's 5 parts. And for the first 3, Munchkinlanders, Gillikeen, and City of Emeralds, nothing, not a single moment is told from Elphaba's perspective, which is super interesting. So the book is told from like a kind of 19th century narrator that's more omniscient than our characters, maybe not totally omniscient. Well, it might be an omniscient narrator, but it is a third-person narrator, and then it tends to follow around the heads of various characters to get our story. The narrator is not following around Elphaba, it's following around people that are orbiting Elphaba, which is super interesting, okay? We get her dad, her mom, her nanny in the first part. We get Glinda and Bach in the second part, and we get Fiyero in the third part. And it's only after all of the events of the Emerald City that we get anything from Elphaba at all, and then we get her perspective on the latter 2 parts. Whereas in the play, it definitely felt like the first half, like leading up to the intermission and defying gravity, is all from Elphaba's perspective. It feels very much like we are following Elphaba around and getting her life, but then after the intermission, it feels a little bit like we are getting the story from other people in the world that are being influenced by the Wicked Witch of the West, right? We're seeing the effects on Glinda, on Fiyero, on the wizard, on Munchkinlanders, on her sister. We're seeing all of these other people being influenced by her, but we don't necessarily see her and her agency in it as much, which is super interesting that it's flopped. I will say the movie kind of loses that nuance. I feel like the movie is just following Glinda and Elphaba all through all of it. We kind of lose the nuance of like who is the POV character and who is being affected by the POV character. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a piece of nuance we lost in adaptation. Alright, let's dive in to the beginning of the book. What do we see in the book? If you're familiar with the musical or if you're familiar with the movie, then you might be surprised at some of the things about the beginning of this story that are quite different from the stage and screen adaptations. First off, Elphaba's Munchkinlander father, Frex, is not a governor, a mayor, he's a priest. And he goes around preaching to different people all of the time and leaves his wife Melina, who's also a Munchkinlander, all alone. And she says she spends a lot of the time alone just chewing on pinlobble leaves, which is a drug made up for the book. And she's super lonely. And so she tends to invite visitors who come through the area into her home and is hospitable to them to chat them up and just see another human. And also, because she's high on pinlobble leaves all the time, she has no idea who Elphaba's father is. It's not Frex, though, which is wild. She kind of has this vague recollection of there being like a peddler that came through, and she's got this green vial from him, and she doesn't really remember anything about it. So, on the day that Elphaba is to be born, this steampunk robot that's wheeled in by a dwarf. In this story, all the robots are referred to as TikTok creatures, which I think is hilarious in modern context. Some of us are TikTok creatures too. So this automatron that is brought into town by the dwarf is called the Time Dragon. And it is this massive automatron with several stages on it for puppet shows. And it tends to display the good and the bad of various villages and expose like affairs and such. And on the day that Elphaba was to be born, it showed a preacher that was very obviously Frex getting hunted down by the village people and killed, and his wife and unborn child killed as well, for reasons that are beyond me. And the village, for reasons, again, that are beyond me, take this as, oh, guess we better do that. So they get their knives and pitchforks out and start chasing him down. He's running for his life. And in the middle of delivering Melina's baby, Elphaba, the midwives have to haul her into the cemetery where people would not expect to find her because they're looking for her and trying to kill her, which is wild to me. And this part, I was like, what? Is this like some kind of enchantment that like mob mentalities everyone or something? I don't know. But she ends up giving birth in the time dragon that has also been brought to the cemetery because they think people probably won't trample it there. So she gives birth to Elphaba inside of the time dragon. And Elphaba is born green and screaming, and bites off a midwife's finger. She has razor sharp baby teeth, which is such a hilarious point in this story that we do not see in the play or movie. And wow, I mean, they fall out and she has regular adult teeth, but baby Elphaba had to be like bound so she wouldn't like chomp her own hands off with her crazy teeth. Also, if you saw Wicked on Broadway, which I was lucky enough to do, I think 2 years ago, I think it wasn't last year, I think it was the year before that. It was incredible. Definitely would recommend. But what is so interesting is they have an automatron surrounding the stage. That's the time dragon. It's a dragon. And it like, you know, moves its head around and stuff. It's super cool looking. But also it's so fun that they did that. I really made this connection like as I was filming this. I filmed this yesterday and the camera didn't save it. But I made this connection yesterday while I was filming that the time dragon is a stage. It's a platform of multiple puppet shows, and then they surround their stage on Broadway with the Time Dragon. The Time Dragon isn't really that relevant to the production of the play, but they kept it in their set design, and I thought that was really lovely and such a cool way to incorporate that. After Elphaba is born, her parents do not know what to do. Frex, her father, has not really recovered from the event in the town of his entire village turning on him and trying to end him, and he never really does quite recover his confidence back from that. But also, having this green child with sharp teeth, he isn't sure what to do with her, and Melina is just drowning her sorrows in pinlaw leaves. So he goes into town and finds Nanny, the nanny that was Melina's nanny back in the day, and brings her back to care for Elphaba. In the play, they replaced the nanny with Dulcibert. They had her be a bear, which I think is a good choice because otherwise, in the story, Elphaba's connections to animals are really only Dr. Dillamond at school, but having her be raised by one would make those affections really strong. And so I think that was a good change, but in the book, she's just a human. Nanny is a pretty good carer for Elphaba. She takes her to meet with other village children in the Munchkinlander village, and even though she's green and weird, the other kids kind of begrudgingly play with her, and that starts to socialize Elphaba, which is something that her parents had never thought of nor were brave enough to do. They were kind of just hiding her. And so Nanny is a really good influence on Elphaba's life. We have another influence on Elphaba's life that is only really key early on in the story, and his name is Turtleheart. He is from the south. He's from the Quadling country, and he is a glassblower that travels through, and they let him, you know, stay in their house and keep him company, and he makes this glass, I think it's a circular disc, but it could be an orb. I'm pretty sure from the description it's a disc, but he makes this disc for Elphaba, and she's looking in it, and both Turtleheart and Elphaba can see more in it. They can see a little hint at the future. But her parents can't see anything. They don't know what she's looking at. But there's a scene where she crawls off into the woods and is hiding under a tree looking through the glass as a little baby. And her first word is horrors as she looks into the glass. And this is also where we learn that Elphaba is terrified of water. Not only terrified of water, but water actively harms her. If rain touches her, it hurts her. And this is something that we don't have in the play or movie. It's kind of just this myth that is made up about her, that like her soul is so unclean that fresh water would destroy her. And I think that's super like interesting way to take that part of the story, but it isn't true to the book that they were adapting, where in the book, like, water for some reason actively harms her, and we never get an explanation for that, but I do think it's an interesting thing to do in both directions. Honestly, I probably prefer how the play and movie did it, because that's kind of crazy, right? She's already green, but then to have water harm her too is kind of a lot. The only other thing you need to know about Turtleheart is that he is very probably Nessa Rose's father. Oh, and he dies very early on. All right, let's get into the movie. The opening scene is basically ding dong, the witch is dead, and Glinda announces that the Wicked Witch is dead. The Munchkinlanders ask her questions. One of the questions that they ask is, why does evil happen? Not only is that the problem of evil, which is a great question, but it also reminds me of a conversation that happens in the book that I wanted to point out. This is one of the first conversations that Glinda and Elphaba have together as roommates, and I just felt like it was a fun callback. Obviously, the movie and the play are not calling back in the same story to things that happened in the book, but I did find like a ton of nods to the content of the book, and I felt like this was one of them. It's like well into the first semester, they haven't really talked at all, but then just one evening they just start talking. No, I mean, do you think evil really exists? Well, how do I know what I think? Well, ask yourself, Miss Galinda, does evil exist? I don't know, you say. Does evil exist? I don't expect to know. And they go on talking about it and whether her father as a priest would know and whether they should trust the word of a priest on the matter. And it's just a really interesting conversation, especially for people who've been largely avoiding talking to each other to open up to. And it kind of speaks to the depth of the friendship that they start building right from the second they start talking to each other. And so it was really fun to have that callback in the beginning of the movie. I really love the scene with Glinda remembering her time with Elphaba while she's talking to a group of people that are happy that she's dead. Just her facial expressions and her mannerisms and her attitude all around all of it is just so sweet and heartwarming, and she's like trying to pretend that she doesn't care. And I really love the way that they framed the story starting with that. The book does start with like a later on moment as the very first moment of the prologue, but it's actually Elphaba watching Dorothy walk along the yellow brick road rather than No One Mourns the Wicked, and I really like the way that they did it here because it's also this lovely framing for the emphasis that is the play and the movie, that is this friendship between Elphaba and Glinda. After that scene, we jump into their time at Shiz. We see everyone arriving on boats to Shiz. They're all dressed in their smart school uniforms, and that's not exactly how it happens in the book. They arrive via train, but that doesn't matter. Although there is a scene with Glinda on the train talking to Dr. Dillamond. He first introduces her to the idea that animals being treated like animals is a bad thing, because if his mother wants to visit him at university, where he's a professor, she would have to, according to the wizard's new guidelines, travel in a crate on the back of the train. And she's uncomfortable with the whole thing because Galinda has not really had much experience with the world at this point, and is quite uncomfortable with the complications that come with it. But another thing that's interesting is that the movie has all of these school uniforms, and it's a co-ed campus, where the book has kind of a more period set university vibe. And now the book was published in, I think, 1999.
1995.
But it's written like it was a early 1900s or mid 1900s story, and so all of the characters are expected to have chaperones with them, especially if they're going to be interacting with men. They're expected to have chaperones. They don't have school uniforms, but they have academic shawls and stuff, and the campuses are divided. There's a female campus and a male campus. I think the female campus is called Shiz, and the male campus might be called something else. I don't remember exactly, but that is one of the major differences that we see book to movie here. This came from the play originally, obviously, but having it be a co-ed campus helps us get to a lot of the scenes faster and have characters interact faster. And so it's a change that makes perfect sense for a play adaptation. Fewer sets to make, get to the story faster, we have less time to tell the same story. Very economical change to make. But in making this change, we do shed a little bit of its time period piece aesthetic. We still have a lot of the steampunk aesthetic, which is ubiquitous with The Wizard of Oz, but we do lose a little bit of the 19th century charm with this adaptation. Diving right into the story, we have a very spunky Elphaba. Our first scene with her is her basically confronting everyone, being like, I'm green, no I didn't eat grass growing up, no I'm not seasick, and it's a very spunky introduction to her, which I really like because I think that is very true to the character of Elphaba that's written in the book Wicked, but it comes a lot faster than we see in the book. In the book, for the first year at least, she's just very quiet, reserved, sits in the back, is kind of an observer of society, and starts to come into her own a little bit later. But once we do get to see more of her, again, because This part of the book is from Galinda's perspective, so we don't see a ton of her. But once we do start to see more of her, we do start to see that spunk come out. And I have a good scene to illustrate that in the book. A Munchkinlander named Bach goes up to introduce himself to Miss Galinda, who happens to be standing near Elphaba. And Elphaba catches his eye, being green, and he realizes that she's the little girl that he played with when he was young. That's right, Bach is one of the Munchkinlanders that Nanny took Elphaba to interact with and to start being socialized while playing with these kids. So they do technically know each other, though she doesn't really remember him. And this is how that interaction goes. You're Miss Elfie, aren't you? How do you know who I am? Master Bach from Munchkinland? I don't know you. You and I played together when we were tiny. You're the daughter of the Unionist minister. I forgot his name. Frex, Elphaba said. Frexfar the Godly, Bach said. That's right. You know, they still talk about him. And the night that a clock of the time dragon came to rush margins. I was 2 or 3 years old and they took me to see it, but I don't remember that. I do remember that you were in a play with me when I was still in short pants. Do you remember Gawainette? She was the woman who minded us. This is all smoking guesswork. How can I contradict? Let me tell you what happened in your life before you can remember it. You were born a frog. You got sacrificed to the clock of the time dragon and you were turned into a boy. But on your marriage night, when your wife opens your legs, you'll turn back into a tadpole and— Miss Elphaba, cried Galinda, flicking open a fan to wave the flush of shame from her face. Your tongue! Oh, well, I have no childhood, said Elphaba, so you can say what you like. I grew up in Quadling country with the marsh people. I squelch when I walk. You don't want to talk to me. Talk to Miss Galinda. She's much better in parlors than I am. So you can see that the character of Elphaba is very much the same. She is spunky and she is sharp. She will not let people catch her down. And obviously, I think the reason for introducing this spunk from her early is that's how you have to approach plays. You have to introduce their character early, why we care, and get us going with the story. We don't have that much time. And then when they made the film adaptation, they kept the story mostly the same, and so those same things happen again. But in the movie and play, Elphaba is actually older than the other people around her because it's her little sister who's now the age to go to school, and she ends up going anyway. And so she is older than the other people around her, so maybe she grew into her confidence sooner in that storyline. Though in the book, she goes on her own right to Shiz and is the same age as Glinda, as Bach, as Fiyero, as all of them, and then Nessa follows her. Well, she would follow her 3 years later, but something happens that she comes 2 years later. And actually, let's get into that. In the movie, Elphaba is older. It's her sister, Nessa Rose, who is the age of coming to Shiz, which I assume is 16, 18, somewhere in that range in this world. Elphaba ends up kind of tagging along against her will, more or less, because she's shown to be adept at sorcery and is taken under Madame Morrible's wing. That's what happens in the play, that's what happens in the movie. But in the book, Elphaba actually goes to Shiz in her own right. Like I said, she was sent to Shiz to be educated. And the whole roommate debacle is a thing in the book, but it's a slightly different debacle. In the play and the movie, Galinda accidentally volunteers to be her roommate, but in the book, everyone needs a chaperone. And it's also called an ama, which I've never heard of that term before. It looks kind of like a ma, which is like a term for grandma, but I guess it means chaperone. Her ama's name is Ama Clutch, and she ends up stepping on a nail on the way and stops to go see a doctor, and so Galinda goes alone. Because she goes alone, it leads to this situation where all of the other girls have roommates in different ways, and she doesn't because her ama wasn't there to negotiate a roommate for her. And so Madame Morrible ends up putting her in a room with Elphaba, the one no one wanted to be roommates with, and she's just stuck with that. As I alluded to, Nessa Rose ends up coming early. She comes 2 years after Elphaba, and that is because Ama Clutch has a great calamity befall her, an illness that comes as a result of something we will get to, and so they need another chaperone. And so Elphaba reaches out to her nanny and asks if she will come and be her chaperone, but the condition there is that she would need to bring Nessa Rose with her, because Nessa Rose needs a lot of care, and so they get permission for Nessa Rose to come a year early. So let's get into Nessa Rose's disability. In the book, Nessa Rose is not bound to a wheelchair. In fact, she can walk a little bit. She needs a little bit of assistance. She's a little wobbly, but she can do it. Her major disability is that she actually doesn't have arms. That is a very different disability than we see in the play or the movie, where she is wheelchair bound, and that is pretty much the extent of her disability. This is a change that was made in the play and then sustained in the movie. And I have feelings about it, complicated ones, because I feel that Nessa Rose's disability in the book is pretty challenging. It is a lot for a person to deal with, and she really does need a lot of aid from other people. In the play, on the other hand, it feels kind of like they changed her disability to be a more palatable disability. It just kind of feels like a ableist change, if that makes sense. Like, she presents as more normal by just being in a wheelchair than by not having arms. I don't know, it's a change that kind of made me uncomfortable when I realized it was there. But I do think that there's something to be said for the practicality of a stage play. It's a lot easier to put a walking actor in a chair than it is to pretend someone doesn't have arms when they do. This could be a great argument for casting a disabled character in a play, but ultimately, like, I understand the practicality of the choice that they make, but that doesn't mean that I agree with it. Speaking of Nessa, there's an event that happens in this first scene at Shiz in the play and in the movie where her father gifts her a beautiful pair of jeweled shoes. This happens right at the beginning of her time at Shiz. It's very much like him thinking of his daughter Nessa and not really thinking of his daughter Elphaba. And that's the case for the book as well. It's not so much that he doesn't think about Elphaba or that he doesn't like her. In the movie, she says something about her father hating her. That isn't necessarily true in the book. He calls her Fabula. He has these nicknames for her. He does love her. He just doesn't think she needs any special attention compared to Nessa Rose, and that's a big shame. Very much a glass child syndrome. The shoes are gifted to Nessa Rose in a way that is very much a slight to Elphaba. It's just clear that he isn't thinking about her. That happens in the book, but it's a lot later on in the story. But you know what was interesting to me? When I think of the story of The Wizard of Oz, I think of ruby slippers, and I think you probably do too. It's like one of the most ubiquitous, like, symbols of The Wizard of Oz. We have, like, the yellow brick road, the ruby slippers, and the Emerald City. Those are, like, the three icons that you think of when you think of The Wizard of Oz. But the slippers aren't ruby. When I watched Wicked, I was like, oh, that's weird that they didn't make the slippers ruby. They're just jeweled. Huh, that's weird. That's what it is in all of them. That's what it is in Wicked. That's what it is in the book, The Wizard of Oz. They are only ruby in, like, one adaptation, that one famous adaptation with Julie Garland that we all think of. They made them ruby slippers, and now that's all we think of, and I think that's kind of hilarious. Alright, but enough on Nessa Rose. Let's get to Galinda. In the play and in the movie, Galinda is headed to Shiz, planning on majoring in sorcery. And in the movie, they end up making it an even bigger emphasis of Galinda's character, this vision of always wanting to be a sorcerer or having some magic powers in part 2 of the movie. But in the book, that isn't necessarily the case. Galinda doesn't go to Shiz planning to major in sorcery, though she does end up majoring in sorcery. She spends, like, at least 2, if not 3 years at Shiz being super lost about what she wants to major in. And Madame Morrible ends up kind of shuffling her into sorcery and making her think of that for the first time. Which is interesting because that's the exact opposite in the play. Now, Elphaba, on the other hand, doesn't do sorcery either. She doesn't do sorcery at all, actually. We see no moment of magic from Elphaba besides that first moment with the glass from Turtleheart when she's like a toddler, all the way until she is, like, in her mid-30s and has left the Emerald City and is headed off. We don't see any magic from her during any of that time, which is really wild, but that is how the book goes. There's no emphasis on magic early on in her life. She studies life sciences under Dr. Dillamond, the biologist professor in the book. So the plotline that happens about sorcery and Elphaba getting into school because of that in the play and in the movie was created specifically for that. And you know how in the play and the movie, Galinda has, like, no aptitude for magic at all. She really wants to study it, but she, like, really cannot do it. Well, in the book, she actually can. She's not super great at it. She ends up, like, exploding one of Elphaba's sandwiches instead of elevating it, but she does magic. She's legitimately magic, which I thought was a very interesting change. They're, like, totally swapped in the play form and in the book form. So talking more about the play and movie and the characters of Elphaba and Galinda, I love them. I've already talked about how much I love Elphaba's characterization right from the get-go. I also really want to emphasize how much I love the song The Wizard and I and how Cynthia Erivo sings it. It's just such a powerful moment and I really, really like it. As I mentioned, that whole plotline with her magic and all of that doesn't come from the book, but that doesn't mean I don't love it. Galinda is also played really hilariously in the story. I think Ariana Grande did a great job. I really do love the way that Galinda is characterized in the movie and in the play. She's so extreme, it's almost drag-like. like with the like, something's terribly wrong. I didn't get my way.
Something is very wrong. I didn't get my way.
But it makes for such a fun character. At this point in the story, she's very much the same character in the movie and in the book. We definitely see her closet taking up most of the room, and Elphaba's dresses, like her 3 dresses to her name, just like narrowly fitting in the corner of the closet. We also have a hilarious nod to the book in a line from, I know it's at least in the movie, I don't remember if it's in the play, but where I think Bach introduces himself to her and is like, oh, we haven't met yet or something, and she's like,
That's strangers. Just people I've never met.
and she says it like it's this profound thought, but it's like very obviously not very profound. It's such a nothing burger, it's hilarious, and that is very much like something she says in the book, so I think they got her characterization spot on. What she says in the book, she's thinking about some of the other wealthy upper class Gilly-Canese girls showing up to Shiz and how they're all adorned in their finest, their pearls and their rubies and such. And she thinks to herself, there was something vulgar about traveling in jewels. As she realized this truth, she codified it into a saying. The overdressed traveler betrays more interest in being seen than in seeing, while the true traveler knows that the novel world about her serves as the most appropriate accessory. Good, very good, is what she thinks to herself as she codifies this into a saying. They got that characterization spot on and is played off in such a funny way. Another thing that's consistent is Glinda complaining to her high-class friends about Elphaba. She basically talks on and on to them about how much she has to put up with in order to separate herself from Elphaba and prevent them from thinking that they're friends, heaven forbid. And this is all completely unprovoked. There's nothing that Elphaba did to influence this at all. In fact, she barely even talks to Glinda, but she does eventually start to bother her a little bit, but only when she can get some entertainment out of it, and that is in the form of Bach. I already talked a little bit about how Bach and Glinda meet in the book, where he recognizes Elphaba, and that's kind of his in to get to know her a little bit. So let's dive further into that, because we know in the movie and in the play he has this big crush on her. Is that a thing in the book? Yes. He is written as sort of a studious character. He's more interested in studying for finals to understand the concepts than just to do well in them, and often turns down social arrangements with the other guys to go into town for the sake of such studying. One evening, he's trying to study, he's trying to understand it, and it's just kind of garbling up in his head. So he goes to blow off some steam. And the method that he chose to blow off some steam, I have some harsh judgment for, because he decides to climb on top of the barn roof between the men's dormitories and the women's dormitories and see if he can catch a peek at anyone in the women's dormitories changing. Luckily, Elphaba notices him up there and calls out to him because she's out in the garden picking stuff by the stables, and he falls off the roof in fright, and good for him, exactly what he deserves. Once they get talking in the garden around the stable, though, he does beg, absolutely beg, Elphaba to get Glinda to meet him there some other time so that he can express his affections to her. Elphaba is originally just super disinterested in this, but then you can tell that she's kind of like, this could be interesting. Maybe I'll do it. I think it might be fun to watch. And I love that she is just down for the plot. She just wants to see what happens. She does convince Glinda to come and meet him there, and I'm gonna read you some of this interaction because I think it's hilarious, and you really get a taste for Elphaba's wit, and you can experience with me how well they transferred her to the play and then the movie based on this section, okay? Good evening, Miss Glinda. It was good of you to agree to meet me. This is highly improper, said Glinda, for a number of reasons, as you well know, Master Bach, but my roomie would give me no rest until I said yes. I can't say that I'm pleased to see you again. Oh, say it, say it. Maybe it'll make it true, said Elphaba. Try it out. He's not so bad, for a poor boy. I am pleased you're so taken with me, Master Bach, said Glinda, but you must see that there can be no special friendship between us. There are too many social impediments for us to proceed. I only agreed to come so that I could tell you this in person. It only seemed fair. It seemed only fair, and it might be fun, too, said Elphaba. That's why I'm hanging around. That's just the way things are. Besides, you're too short. What about his subversion of custom by coming all this way? What about his silliness? Said Elphaba. Enough, said Glinda. That'll do, Miss Elphaba. Please, you're too certain of yourself, said Bach, if I may be so bold. You're not so bold at all, said Elphaba. You're embarrassing me with hanging back so. Come on, say something interesting. I'm starting to wish I'd gone to chapel. You're interrupting, said Bach. Miss Elphie, you've done a wonderful thing to encourage Miss Glinda to meet me, but I must ask you to leave us alone to sort things out. Neither of you will understand what the other is saying. I'm a Munchkinlander by birth anyway, if not by upbringing, and I'm a girl by accident if not by choice. I'm the natural arbiter between you two. I don't believe you can get along without me. Besides, I paid for this show by wheedling Miss Galinda for 3 days running. I get to watch. The conversation carries on, and all throughout it, she feeds her running commentary in it, and it's so funny. Like later on, when Bach is like, oh, I'm not proposing marriage. I just think we should be friends. She's like, see, I'm glad I didn't leave. This is just getting good. And then later on, when all Galinda can muster for referring to Bach is fun, instead of, handsome or daring or something, Elphaba says, I'd give a lot to achieve fun. The best I can usually hope for is stirring. And when people say that, they're usually referring to digestion. At some point, they both yell Elphaba at her in the middle of her commentary. It is so funny. It's such a good scene. I really love how it's played, and I think they really did capture a lot of that wit in the movie. Elphaba is a little bit more serious in the movie, and I think in the play as well, than she comes off in this book at first. But book Elphaba gets more serious as well. So I think overall they just wrote a more consistent character because they aren't working with as big of a time span as the book is. I don't remember exactly how long the play covers of her life, but it's like basically from Shiz to maybe a decade later or something like that. The movie covers something like that as well, starting at Shiz and then going a time jump of maybe 5-10 years if we're being generous. As I said, this book covers a lot of her life, so she goes through a lot of different emotions and character development across her plot. I think in the play they were given less time to work with, and so they had to make a more concise character for her. But the youthful, witty charm of young Elphaba in the book is absolutely unparalleled. Alright, so we've talked about the Bach interactions in the book. We also have those same Bach interactions in the movie. We have Bach introducing himself to Galinda. We have him falling head over heels for her right away. And then as the proposal of going to the Ozdust Ballroom comes in, Galinda says, would you be my hero if you would invite Nessa Rose to come with us?
To go invite her.
She convinces him that inviting the disabled girl to the event would curry her favor, and so he does it for her. So that's the story that we get with Bach, and then there's this whole plot of Nessa Rose kind of falling in love with Bach throughout the story, and hate to break it to you, that story does not happen in the book at all. There is no connection between Bach and Nessa Rose other than that they're both interacting with Elphaba at school. There is absolutely no romance. So let's talk about the romance aspect of that plot. We'll get back into it later on as we discuss movie part 2 because more things happen there. If you know the story, you know. But I thought that this addition, this plot line with Nessa Rose and Bach was such a interesting, fascinating, incredibly written aspect to add to the story. And the fact that the scriptwriters for the musical came up with it, it just speaks to their talent and their ability to weave things together, because I think it's such a, heartbreaking plot where Bach is just such a coward. He cannot let Nessa Rose down lightly. He can't tell her that he has no feelings for her. So he's leading her on, and obviously she makes her own bad choices later, but he is super cruel by being benevolent toward her. And I think that that is just such a good commentary that the world needs. It's such an interesting plot. And again, it doesn't happen in the book at all.
Editing Emily here, you'll be seeing a little bit of me throughout this video, but I feel like I was building up to a point and I didn't really get to it, and that's that if we think we can only do the kind thing, but the kind thing, quote unquote, doesn't actually include authenticity, if that includes lying to ourselves or others or pushing ourselves down, then ultimately it won't end up being the kind thing to ourselves or anyone else.
In that plotline, Galinda is very obviously looking down on Nessa Rose as thinking she's someone who needs to be taken as a charity case to be invited rather than invited as a person. In the book, on the other hand, I wouldn't say that Galinda's opinion of Nessa Rose is that much better because she doesn't like her, but she doesn't view her as a charity case. She views her as a person of her own right. And the reason that she doesn't like her is because that Nessa Rose is the worst. Nessa Rose is such an annoying character in the book. She's taken after her father in the religious route and is an absolute zealot and harasses people. She is demanding to people around her. She puts down Elphaba. She is such a unlikable character. In my notes, I literally have a bullet that's counts against Nessa Rose, and eventually I stopped keeping track because there were so many. But here are some of the highlights, okay? Nanny, who's come along with Nessa Rose to school, remember, as their chaperone, is talking to Bach about the eminent Throp, which is a, like, great-grandfather of Elphaba and Nessa Rose's that is still alive and still in power in the Munchkinland territory. She really is just explaining the familial connection to Bach. And Nessa says, Nanny, don't gossip. It hurts my soul. Which is just like so preachy and so uncalled for and out of line. Like she was just talking. Another point against Nessa Rose that I have marked is that Elphaba and Glinda are just having a super casual conversation about magic, and Elphaba sort of goes on a tangent here and says this. There's nothing ontologically interesting about magic. Not that I believe in unionism either, she protested. I'm an atheist and an aspiritualist. You say that to shock and scandalize, said Nessa Rose primly. She always does this, usually to make Father irate. Father's not around, Elphaba reminded her sister. I stand in for him, and I'm offended. It's all very well to turn your nose up at unionism when you have been given a nose by the unnamed god. Quite funny, isn't it, Galinda? Childish. She looked spitting angry. Father's not around, said Elphaba again in a tone that verged on apologetic. You needn't rush to public defenses of his obsessions. What you term his obsessions are my articles of faith, she said with chilling clarity. This scene really bothered me because this is literally just Elphaba making a bit of an offhanded comment about something about her, a thing that she believes, and Nessa Rose goes into a tirade against her. And I have one more count against her written down, so let's get into that. This one comes when the jeweled slippers finally arrive for Nessa Rose. There's something that her father picked up from a peddler and then created the jewels in them, all thinking of her and sent to her. And he sent them with absolutely nothing for Elphaba in the box. Elphaba comments on them as they put them on her. They're just gorgeous. Nessa Rose, they're made for you. They fit like a dream. Oh, Elfie, don't be cross, Nessa Rose said. Don't ruin my small happiness with resentment, will you? He knows you don't need this kind of thing. Of course not, said Elphaba. Of course I don't. Like, that was so uncalled for. She's literally just complimenting. She didn't even point out that there was nothing for her in the box at all. She's complimenting the gift that you receive, and you automatically jump to, well, don't be mad about it. They're for me. Don't ruin my happiness by being mad. Like, that, yeah. She makes me so mad. So this is who Nessa Rose is in the book. So she is quite dislikable, all in her own right. I did actually kind of find a parallel to this characterization in the movie part 1. It's not nearly as strong. Nessa Rose is basically, at this point, characterized as just angelically sweet, and I think that this comment does kind of feed into her angelically sweet persona. But when she tells Elphaba that Galinda sent Bach to invite her to the dance, Elphaba's rightfully suspicious of whether Bach actually wants to ask her to the dance or is just doing it because he's told. Nessa Rose immediately cuts her off and says, don't say another bad word about her. Again, I feel like this was kind of written as her just being incredibly sweet, where it's like, I don't want you to say anything bad about someone. Whereas in the book, it's like very much a way that she weaponizes her sweetness of like, don't do this, and kind of like controls people around her. So a different characterization, but I did see that parallel there. So that is basically the differences between Nessa in the movie and play and in the book. All right, now let's talk about the hat. In the movie, we have the scene where Galinda has this horrible, ugly black hat that she decides to gift to Elphaba as a joke. Tell her it will look good on her and everyone will make fun of her. That is the scene of the hat in the movie and in the play. And it's not exactly the same way in the book, but there is a pivotal moment with a hat. It really is very similar in some ways. She has this like super bright yellow hat. I think Elphaba just puts it on and looks in the mirror, and Galinda is like, oh, don't do that, like it's gonna look terrible on you. And then she looks at her, and the way that it complements her green skin, it's described as like she looks like a beautiful flower, the stem and the bulb of it, and it's just this stunning moment. And she's like, wow, you're beautiful. And she has this moment where, like, I feel like this is kind of the moment where Galinda is such a superficial character that it wasn't until she saw her as beautiful that she started seeing her as a person, which is a commentary in and of itself. But it is this, like, super impactful moment where she's, like, saying something positive about Elphaba to Elphaba for no reason other than just that it's true. And it's this really cute moment. So those are the hat scenes, but the hat scene kind of plays into the Ozdust ballroom scene. Again, I hope you've seen the movie or the play. to watch this video. It's kind of important background as I'm drawing these connections. But you know that immediately after gifting her the hat, she invites her to come to the Ozdust ballroom. Now, this scene where she gifts her an ugly hat and tells her to come, where it kind of becomes a prank on Elphaba that she came dressed so horridly, and then Galinda ends up feeling terrible for it. It is kind of two scenes combined, because we have the hat scene in the book that's the yellow hat instead of the black hat. And then we have a very similar prank on Elphaba to the Ozdust ballroom prank, where for the summer, Galinda and all of her rich friends go and stay at this lake house. And Elphaba receives a letter saying, like, you should come and join me. And Bach is reading over her shoulder and he's like, oh no, it sounds like she's basically crying for help there. And the way that it's worded kind of does. Like, you really need to come. And so he's like, we gotta go. He convinces Elphaba to go, who is not considering it at all. He and his friend Averick and Elphaba all hop in a carriage and head out to the lake house. And when they get there, they discover Galinda didn't write the letter. She has no idea what they're talking about. The girl whose family owns the lake house wrote it as a laugh to see if she would show up so they could make fun of her, which is such a horrendous prank. And Elphaba, in her stubbornness, which is very much the core of her nature, is like, well, you invited me, so I'm here now. And she acts very bold, but you can tell she's deeply hurt because she stays locked in the room for like several days, and then eventually starts to come out and interact with everyone else.
Editing Emily again, I forgot a detail about their lake house stay in the middle of filming and recorded it later, so I have no transition, but there's another thing that happens at the lake house that I had to tell you about.
As you can see in what I've talked about in the book so far, Bach's feelings for Galinda are very much from the book, but they're a little bit different in that Galinda lets him down lightly right away, right? And lets him down even more firmly after that. But they do spend a lot of time together. And at the lake house, they have this conversation where Galinda calls him habit forming. Basically, she just likes having him around and she doesn't know what to do about it because she doesn't think it's proper to like him. And they end up kissing and like fully making out in this scene. But then after that, they cut things off and things are over for both of them mutually. It's sometime around here in the book, I don't remember, I think it's a little bit later, where Galinda finally starts to see the shallow and cruelness of her friends and starts to look to Elphaba for a source of real friendship. And that's exactly what we see in the movie and the play as well. This Ozdust ballroom scene where Elphaba starts doing this dance thing and it's really weird, and then she joins in to try and prevent the embarrassment. She's really starting to see Elphaba as someone who could be a true friend. So we start to see this character develop for Galinda at the same time in both stories. But speaking of the Ozdust ballroom scene, we can hardly talk about it without talking about Fiyero. Fiyero in the movie is this swoon-worthy prince who pretends to not give a damn about anything because he cares a lot and it's heavy and he doesn't want to. So he pretends that nothing matters and is teaching everyone how to live an unexamined life. Yes? Yes. I love this Fiyero. I love this Fiyero a lot. He is so fun. Such an interesting character. I really love the way that he's written. He is lovely. And also, that is not who he is in the book, and I miss Book Fiyero when I watch the movie, okay? Book Fiyero is described as very hot, but he is from the Vinkus territory, which is to the west, as I talked about, and they are nomadic people. He is darker in skin tone, and he has these triangle face tattoos in this pattern all the way up him and down to the collar of his shirt. So first off, face tattoos. Why did they not use that in the movie? Come on, guys. Or in the play. It would have been really visually interesting in the play. Why did they cut out his face tattoos? That's what I want to know. He's also pretty quiet. He's not like so reserved or anything. He just doesn't demand attention to himself. However, his entrance is very flashy, and it's not in the form of being announced over the loudspeakers.
Prince Fiyero Tiggerlar of Winky Country will be filling out our student body.
He comes in late at the beginning of the second year, and the current of the door opening to the classroom disturbs this like smoke magic thing that was happening in the front of the room, and the professor gets so mad at him. So everyone is very aware of Fiyero from the moment he walks in. He also, I think, almost gets killed by a pair of antlers that got enchanted by the smoke by mistake. There was a whole thing going on there. We see a little bit of this lovely Fiyero in the school days section of the book, but we get even more of it in the City of Emerald section. So wait for that. I love this Fiyero so much. But again, I really love who they created for the play as Fiyero and the way that he's played in the movie. it's all perfect. Like, Fiyero is to die for in no matter what format you get him in, okay? That's just the rules. I don't make them. But the movie and play Fiyero is very much a combination of one of Bach's friends, Averick, who's very upper class. It's a combination of that and book Fiyero, I think. I think that's what they did. And I love the amount of time that Fiyero gets in the movie. I love the banter between him and Galinda and the banter between him and Elphaba. It's all lovely. But one of the drawbacks, I think, to the emphasis that we get on him in the movie and play is that I feel like we take so much time for Fiyero that we miss out on the Charmed Circle. So the Charmed Circle is actually a chapter name in the book. I'm patting the book down here if you can't tell. It's on my lap. And the Charmed Circle consists of Elphaba, Galinda, Nessa Rose, Fiyero, Bach, Averick, and Bach's two friends, Crope and Tibbet. We don't see anything from Crope and Tibbet in the play. They were written out, but I really love them, and I love the way that this entire circle is written. I feel like we get a glimpse of this in The Wicked Movie Part 2, where we kind of look back at this glimpse in the past of them being happy back at school, and that like made me think of the Charmed Circle, but it was just Elphaba, Galinda, Fiyero, Nessa, and Bach. So like half of the Charmed Circle isn't there. And before we get into Crope and Tibbet and the role that they play in the book, I do want to say really quickly, the Ozdust Ballroom is also a change made in the play, and I'm so glad they made that change because what takes its place in the book is the Philosopher's Club, which is like this really freaky sex club thing that eventually when they go to, I don't remember, I think it's Crope, like it breaks his brain. He never recovers. He dies. The Philosopher's Club was weird, and I'm glad that they did the Ozdust Ballroom instead, because that's way more wholesome, and we did not need a freaky sex club in this book. That was just so out of left field. Okay, but let's talk about where Crope and Tibbet come in. So, as I mentioned, Dr. Dillamond is a biology professor in the book, okay? He is groundbreaking in his research. Everybody knows about him, and he only teaches at the girls' school. And so when Bach realizes that Elphaba knows him, Elphaba takes classes from him, she's in his major, he's so excited about this. He's studying farming, and so like the life sciences are super connected in that, and so he wants to know everything about Dr. Dillamond. And so they get talking about it a little bit, and they're talking about how during this summer, Bach is working in the library, and it is an incredible library. Elphaba is like drooling over the concept of it, but women and animals aren't allowed inside. And so she's like, the things that me and Dr. Dillamond could do with the research in that library, and Bach is like, I can get in the library, I work there. And so they decide to work together to help Dr. Dillamond with his research. Bach starts smuggling things systematically out of the library to get to Dr. Dillamond. And he works there with his friends Croak and Tibbet, who are described inadvertently at first, but then at some point it is confirmed that they are these two like kind of flamboyant gay boys. They don't get the most characterization, but I do really like them and the dynamic that they play. As I mentioned, they get roped into smuggling books out to Dr. Dillamond. And so they're teasing Bach about the secrecy and are like trying to like dress up in like these like dark cloaks and go creeping through the shadows. And he's like, guys, please, you're embarrassing me. It's so funny. And then Elphaba shows up in a cloak and is like hiding in the corner when they go to give it to her. And Bach is like, Elphaba, please. I just convinced them that this is not that shady of work. And she's like, what do you expect from me? I'm green. If people see me doing suspicious things over and over again, they're gonna remember it. Come on, guys. And so it's this super funny back and forth, and there's just such a fun dynamic there. Now, what is Dr. Dillamond's research? I mentioned a little bit before, he's basically inventing the microscope as we speak, and is trying to look at the cells of humans, animals, and animals to prove that there is no difference across them and they should all be treated the same. He's trying to use this research to fight back against the bans that the wizard has been putting in place ever since he took power. He's just been systematically stripping animals of power. In fact, the reason that Dr. Dillamond teaches at the girls' school is because animals aren't allowed to teach at the boys' school. So there's a lot of restrictions being placed on animals at this point, and so he's trying to take a stand and fight against it in the way that he knows how. Now let's talk about how Dr. Dillamond and his research is changed for the play. He becomes a history professor in the play and is talking about how the rights have been stripped from animals. This is a change that I think ultimately made a lot of sense for a stage play. It's a lot easier to have a history professor do exposition in that sort of a format than it would be to have this whole like underground sneaking manuscripts sort of situation for a biologist. So it makes a lot of sense, but I do think it takes a little bit from Dr. Dillamond's character, where not only is he a good professor, but he's like an incredibly respected academic. He is one in the forefront of biology. And in the play and movie, he flips around the blackboard and sees "animals should be seen and not heard" graffitied on it. That is something that comes from the book, but it doesn't come quite in that format. In the book, there's a poetry night where you say like, I think it's 13 lines of rhyming prose, and then the last line doesn't rhyme to stand out. So like the poem that I read about the people from around Oz and what they're like, how the last line is, "Give me an apple and I'll say it again," and it feels super out of place. That's the structure of the poetry that they're using. And at the end of a super nonsensical poem, Madame Morrible reads the line, "Animals should be seen and not heard," and it goes silent. And then all of the animals leave in a huff. And so it is just as big of a like pointed statement against him, but it's done in slightly different ways. And I actually like both of the ways that it's done. In the play, we see that the Great Drought is what caused basically people to start looking for someone to blame. That's true for the book as well. And so animals start to be blamed for the lack of resources, for all of these issues. And so if you punish them, then somehow that will make our lives better or something, playing some kind of zero-sum game.
I forgot to explain here that in the real world, we often think that's how it works, even though that is not how things work. It's this messed up sense of justice where we feel like as long as someone else has it worse than us, then our lives are somehow better. It's this tendency we seem to have where we try and push other people down and blame them when there are things out of our control. But it's just a fact that taking away rights from others doesn't give us anything.
And so I really, really like the way that this was written, and I especially appreciate that in the play and the movie they kept that aspect of the book. Following this storyline a little bit further in the movie, and I think it's just the movie, I don't think this comes from the play, we have that scene of Dr. Dillamond and his underground group of other animals talking about like, what should we do? Do we have to flee Oz? How are we going to fight back against our rights being taken away? And that's not something from the book. I think that in a way is trying to put back into the story this like underground working with Dr. Dillamond to try and prove that animals deserve rights. That plot from the book, I think that was how they were putting it in to the movie. But back to Dr. Dillamond specifically, in the movie he's talking about how some animals are losing the ability to speak, right? And he's talking about, you know, as they're oppressed, they kind of forget who they are and all of that. That's not exactly how it happens in the book. Not only do animals not lose the ability to speak, some of them choose not to when they're super oppressed later on in the story, but that just isn't Dr. Dillamond's arc. He doesn't get hauled out by the police. He gets murdered in the book. Dr. Dillamond dies. It's not the police coming in hauling him out after someone says animals should be seen and not heard. He supposedly broke a glass and then walked into a shard of it and it slit his throat, which is super unbelievable to everyone. Everyone knows that he's murdered, but that's the story that they're going with. And so what I've been alluding to for a while about some calamity that befell Alma Clutch is she saw Dr. Dillamond out in the middle of the night and was like, that's weird. And so she was like, good night, girls. I'm going to go check on Dr. Dillamond. Goes down to see how he is and accidentally watches him be murdered. And then she's cursed by Madame Morrible with this illness that there's this whole thing that Galinda makes up about her as this story for like why she needs different roommate situations than she got. It doesn't work. But the story that she came up with is that Alma Clutch sometimes forgets which things are animate and which things aren't. She'll talk to a nail and be like, oh, you poor nail, and then she'll look at you and think that you're just an object, and like all of this, and she's fainting spells and all of these things. And that's what Madame Morrible curses her with. And she's like, oh no, she relapsed. And Galinda is like, what? I made that up. And also, Madame Morrible is the only person I told that to. So like she definitely gave her this curse, and so she feels super horrible about this. She's like, wow, I basically did this to her by coming up with a stupid lie at one point. And because she witnessed something horrific, now she's cursed with that and it's all my fault. And also Madame Morrible is not to be trusted. And there is this whole plot with Madame Morrible that I think is underappreciated in the play. We get Madame Morrible being horrible later, but she is really awful back at Shiz. Like, it's very clear from the get-go that she's, like, basically threatening Galinda, like, if you know what's good for you, kick Elphaba out. Like, make her life so horrible that she wants to go home because she just doesn't like Elphaba. She's green. She's a bad reputation for the school. And so Glinda has always felt kind of bullied by Madame Morrible, and I'm sure other people do as well. We have her perspective in the book, right? She really is just so bad. In the movie and the play, we have two plots revolving around Madame Morrible, okay? The first is after Glinda is so kind to Elphaba and gives her this hat and invites her to the Ozdust ballroom, Elphaba goes and talks to Madame Morrible and says, basically, I will quit the sorcery program if you don't let Glinda in. And because she's so talented and her prize student, she's like, okay, fine. So she goes and invites Glinda to the sorcery program. The other main plot is Madame Morrible writing to the wizard about Elphaba's extreme skill and trying to get her an audience with him. In the book, there are two plots with her as well. The first one is how much she hates Elphaba and trying to convince Glinda to scare her away. And then the second one involves a binding spell. And we will come back to that. I just have a few things I want to talk about before that. Let's go back to after the Ozdust ballroom scene. In the movie, we have this cute scene where Elphaba and Glinda are talking and laughing and having one of their first really fun conversations. It's the one where Glinda says we have to trade secrets and is like, I'm gonna marry Fiyero. That scene, it's very, very cute and wholesome. I really, really liked it, and I felt like it really mirrored the first wholesome conversation with them in the book, where kind of for no reason at all, when Glinda comes home one day, she just ends up talking to Elphaba, who's in the room curled up by the fire reading a book as usual. And it's just a very tentative, kind, wholesome conversation that I really liked, and I felt the mirroring there. They have just such a random conversation. Here's some parts of it. I really liked it. Well, I don't read the same thing every day, you know. Tonight I am reading some of the speeches of the early Unionist fathers. Why would anyone want to do that? I don't know. I don't even know if I want to read them. I'm just reading them. But why, Miss Elphaba the Delirious? Why? Why? Elphaba looked up at Glinda and smiled. Elphaba the Delirious. I like it. It's just such a fun moment in such a casual conversation, and this feels very much the same way, right? Where it's just like, we're having fun now. Let's talk about secrets. It's a very casual, fun girlhood moment. After the scene in the movie and the play, we have the popular song. And I love this song so much. It's such a fun scene. Ariana Grande does an incredible job as Glinda, just running around and jumping and swinging from the chandelier and swimming on the ground with her la la la's. It's so fun. I really, really enjoy this scene. There's nothing that will not make me smile at that scene. I already mentioned how much I loved Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba, but Ariana Grande as Glinda is so incredible too. The casting was really just on point for this movie. I'm not even particularly an Ariana Grande fan, but I just felt she was so perfect for this. She has the talent, she has the personality, she does it all so well. And in that scene, Glinda fails to transform the frock coat, the front, into a beautiful ball gown, right? And that scene reminded me a lot of the sandwich scene that I already mentioned in the book, where she's trying to levitate Elphaba's sandwich and ends up exploding it instead. And it felt like a fun callback. Oh, and we also have, in this moment, when she puts the rose over her ears, she's like, Miss Elphaba, you're beautiful. And I was like, yes, we finally get the, conclusion of the yellow hat scene in the book, where she's like, wow, you look beautiful. Because we don't have the yellow hat, we have the black hat, but we still get that moment. All right, now I already talked quite a bit about Dr. Dillamond, including his murder, but this is where it happens in the play and the movie, and so let's talk about it just a little bit again here. In the movie, instead of being killed, he's just told he's no longer allowed to teach and is dragged off by the police. And as he's dragged out, he says, you're not being told the whole story. And I felt like this line was such a good way to tell us a lot of content really quickly that is shown to us in the book, which is the fact that they are not being told the whole story. That's something that we get in the book, where they're just so clueless about the world. Even though they're at Shiz, they're supposed to be learning about the world, they still don't know the active politics that are happening in the Emerald City that's affecting the rest of Oz. They're constantly caught blindsided by changes that are happening. And I feel like this line in the movie was a nod to that. Seeing that happen, I started to realize a lot of different ways that, in the book, we get a lot of telling of things that we're able to show in the movie, and then vice versa as well. We get some tellings of things that we had time to show at length in the the book, but we don't quite have in the movie. After this scene in the movie, Elphaba really wants to go to the wizard about animal rights and try and talk about why is this happening, you need to do something about it. But in the book, Elphaba is not interested in this at all because she knows that all of the restrictions on animals' privileges and abilities to do things are coming from the top. Everybody knows that it's coming from the wizard, and so she's not like, I'm gonna go tell the wizard that things are bad, because like she knows that they come from him. But ultimately she does end up deciding to go to the wizard a little bit later on, and that's because of Dr. Dillamond's murder, not just because he's no longer allowed to teach. So that's another difference that we have there. Right after this in the movie, we jump literally immediately to the lion cub scene. In the movie, Professor Nicodic brings in a lion cub in a cage and is like, this is a cage. Upon seeing this, Elphaba is like, what on earth? Why aren't we doing anything about this? Like, that is a child lion that is terrified. Why are we putting him in a cage? Why is everyone okay with this? And then she smacks the poppies down and puts everyone to sleep with them. And it's this beautiful scene, and it's a fun nod to the poppies putting people to sleep in the original Wizard of Oz story. And then she and Fiyero take the lion cub and release it into the wild, and they have this whole very, very adorable, yearning, romantic moment. And I love it. Anyway, that's not how it happens in the book. So let's talk about how it happens in the book. In the book, the scene with Professor Nicodic and the lion in the cage happens like an entire year after that, okay? We get a lot more time at Shiz in the book than we do in the movie. Now, because there are animals and animals in the book, there are animals that are treated like animals, and then there are animals that are treated like humans. So cages already exist. So it's not, this is a cage, let's put animals in them. Instead, it's him performing his biology experiments because he's the replacement biology professor for Dr. Dillamond. And he's like, look, I took this lion cub and I made it so it couldn't feel pain. And then he gets out the instruments and he's like, see, lions that are just animals, they don't feel pain. Let me show you. And the lion is shivering and looks terrified. And she's like, it's literally shivering right there. And he's like, oh, it always does that. That's why I called it Burr. And she's like, no, that is literally not what's happening. But everyone else in the room is also like, oh my gosh, this is insane. Why would you think it wouldn't feel pain? It's terrified right now. And so the entire classroom revolts in this moment. There are people stopping the professor and moving him away. There are people shouting, and then some of the girls grab the lion and sneak it away. But Elphaba isn't one of them. I think having Elphaba be one of them makes a lot of sense for this story in general, but especially for putting it on as a play and trying to get through the content faster. You've got to put that characterization of Elphaba cares about this a little bit stronger and a little bit faster in the story. Honestly, that's a change that I would make in the book if I were advising the author. And then after the scene with Fiyero, we have I'm Not That Girl, and it's such an Elphaba song, and it's so good, and I'm gonna cry. That doesn't matter. Let's keep going. The push and pull between Elphaba and Galinda with Fiyero is such an incredible plot from the play. I really, really love it. I love the sad, beautiful, tragic love story that it is, where someone will be crushed at every moment of this love triangle, and it's so deep and all of the people care for each other, and that's part of what makes it so heart-wrenching. It's incredibly written. I really, really love it. All the flowers to that plot line. And it doesn't happen in the book. So let's talk about what happens in the book. Ultimately, I think that the concept of this push and pull was inspired by the book because Elphaba and Fiyero and another person do have a dynamic of push and pull between them, but it isn't Galinda because Galinda is too racist. She wouldn't date someone who's dark skin toned. So that's book Galinda. She is a little bit too far gone in her high classness for all of that. But I do think that the inspiration, the seed for this push and pull was in the book, and it was executed so well in the play. Okay, I promised I would come back to Madame Morrible's binding spell, the second event with her at Shiz in the book. I am actually going to read a bit of this to you because I think it's super interesting and it is very different from what happens in the play. So let's dive in. In at least their third year, because Nessa Rose is there, or perhaps in their 4th year. It's not entirely clear. Madame Morrible brings Glinda, Elphaba, and Nessa Rose into her office and forbids anyone else from coming in for the time being. And here is what happens. You will not repeat what you hear in this room. You will not want to. You will not choose to. You will not be able to. I am wrapping each of you in a binding cocoon as regards this very sensitive material. No, she held up a hand at Elphaba's protest. No, you have no right to object. The deed is already done, and you must listen and be open to what I say. She talks on about how they're learning important things at Shiz, but they're in a bubble and know very little of the world, and goes on to say, our wizard seems strong enough. Ah, but is he? Is he really? He has a grasp of internal politics. He's no slouch at negotiating rates of exchange. He rules the Emerald City with an industry and ability that the decaying, knob-jawed Ozma line never dreamed of. Yes, but things are not always as they seem, and it has been clear for some time that the wizard's bag of tricks would not do forever. The wizard needs some agents, some people with managing skills, some people with gumption. In a word, women. I have called you 3 girls in here. Despite my opinion as to your behavior, I have singled you out. There is more in each of you than meets the eye. Miss Nessa Rose, being the newest, you are the most hidden to me. But once you outgrow that fetching habit of faith, you will display a ferocious authority. Your bodily disorder is of no significance here. Miss Elphaba, you are an isolate, and even in my binding spell, you sit there stewing in scorn at every word I say. This is evidence of a great internal power and force of will, something I deeply respect, even when marshaled against me. You have shown no sign of interest in sorcery, and I don't claim you have any natural aptitude, but your splendid lone wolf spit and spirit can be harnessed. Oh yes it can, and you needn't live a life of unfulfilled rage. And Miss Glinda, you have surprised yourself with the talents at sorcery you possess. I knew you would. I had hoped your inclinations might rub off on Miss Elphaba, but that they haven't is only firmer proof of Miss Elphaba's iron character. She goes on, I need, eventually, to place an adept in Gillikeen somewhere. Miss Glinda, with your middle-range social position and your transparent ambitions, you can slime your way into ballrooms and margrooms and still be at home in the pigsties. Oh, don't squirm so. Your good blood is only on one side, and it's not a terribly refined strain anyway. An adept of Gillikeen, Miss Glinda, does it appeal? Then to Elphaba. Miss Elphaba, full of the teenage scorn of inherited position, you are nonetheless the 3rd Throp descending. One day you will inherit what is left of Colwyn grounds and that pretentious pile in Nest Hardings, and you can manage to be the adept of Munchkinland. Your unfortunate skin condition notwithstanding, indeed perhaps because of it, you have developed a feistiness and an iconoclasm that is just faintly appealing when it doesn't nauseate. It will come to be of service, believe me. And Miss Nessa Rose, having grown up in Quadling Country, you will want to return there with Nanny. The social situation in Quadling Country is such a mess, but it may come back in a small measure, and there should be someone there to oversee the ruby mines. We need someone to look after things in the South. Once you recover from your religious mania, it'll be the perfect setting. You don't expect a life of high society anyway, not without arms. After all, how will you dance without arms? Which, F her for that one. Here the head paused and looked around. Oh, girls, I know you're young. I know this grieves you. You mustn't think of it as a prison sentence, though, but an opportunity. So that is Madame Morrible's plan in the book. She binds them so that they can't talk about this and uses her magic to persuade them in this inclination. Immediately after this in the book, Elphaba grabs Glinda and says, we are leaving now. They pack up a little bit of stuff and head to the Emerald City to talk to the wizard. This is the absolute tipping point for Elphaba. She doesn't want to get brought into all of this. She wants to be making a change for everything that's going wrong in Oz. Let's talk about how going to see the wizard in the Emerald City went in the book before we circle back around to how it went in the movie and play. They have to go by carriage and stay at inns. It is an arduous journey, but when they get there, they do get an audience with the wizard. When they get in to see the wizard, it seems like no one is there at first. It's a silent antechamber with a throne on a dais that no one is sitting in, and they stand there confused for a while until Elphaba says, shh, and then rain starts to pour, and they see an apparition of a human skeleton sitting on the throne, and his ribcage flexes open like 2 hands opening up. From the heart of the storm, they hear, I am Oz, the great and terrible. And this is something from the OG Wizard of Oz story, where he appears differently to everyone who goes in to see him. That's something that they preserve from the OG Oz story. They are both absolutely frightened. Elphaba cannot get a sound out. Glinda is elbowing her like, go on, Elfie, say something. And she is not saying anything. And they stand there like that for a while. He ends up asking again, like, who are you? And then finally, they speak up. We're students of Madame Morrible at Crage Hall in Shiz. Your Highness, we're in possession of some vital information. And Glinda turns to her and says, we are? Thank you for telling me. Elphaba says, we're here on important business. I have news of the murder of a great scientist and a great thinker, Your Highness. I have news of important discoveries that he was making and their suppression. I have every interest in pursuit of justice, and I know you do too, so that the amazing revelations of Dr. Dillamond will help you reverse your recent judgments on the rights of animals. Dr. Dillamond? Said the wizard. Is that what this is all about? She replies, it's about an entire population of animals systematically deprived of their, oh, I know of Dr. Dillamond and his work, said the glowing bones of the wizard. Derivative, unauthenticated, specious garbage. What you'd expect of an academic animal. I know of his interests and his findings. I know little of what you call his murder, and I care less. Then Elphaba whips some papers out of her sleeve that she'd been hiding there and says, this is not propaganda, Your Highness. This is a well-argued theory of consciousness inclination, is what he calls it. And you'll be amazed to learn of his discoveries. No right-thinking ruler can afford to ignore the implications, and he cuts her off. That you presume me to be right-thinking is touching, says the wizard. And she responds, I shall take you to be right-thinking, for if I did not, I would be obliged to join an army against you. And Glinda, very distressed by this turn of events, says, oh hell, Elfie, she doesn't speak for both of us, Your Highness. I'm an independent person here. And fair enough, because in the way that this is playing out in the book, Elphaba is really coming off strong against the wizard, so Glinda is reasonably scared at this moment. Then we go on. Please, said Elphaba, at once hard and soft, proud and pleading. Glinda realized she had never before witnessed Elphaba wanting anything. Please, sir, the hardship on the animals is more than can be borne. It isn't just the murder of Dr. Dillamond, it's the forced repatriation, this chattelizing of free beasts. You must get out and see the sorrow. There is worry that the next step will be slaughter and cannibalism. This isn't merely youthful outrage. What's happening is immoral. And the conversation does not go well. The wizard responds to that saying, I do not listen when anyone uses the word immoral. If not immoral, then what word can I use to imply wrong? Said Elphaba. Try mysterious, and then relax a little. The thing is, my green girlie, it is not for a girl or a student or a citizen to assess what is wrong. This is the job of the leaders, and why we exist. Then Elphaba responds quite smartly, but then nothing would keep me from assassinating you did I not know what wrong was. And Glinda steps in again. I don't believe in assassination. I don't even know what it means. Yoo-hoo, I'm going to take my leave while I'm still alive. But the wizard stops her. Wait, I have something to ask you. Madame Morrible, tell me why she sent you here. And when he doesn't get much of an answer from them, because Elphaba says she didn't send them, they came themselves, he says, has she brought you in? And Glinda doesn't really understand this part. Elphaba seems a little bit more aware. She's like, yeah, obviously the binding ceremony was bringing us in. You can tell that she's kind of playing with this idea. Glinda's a little bit more confused, and throughout the book, they start to kind of lose the awareness of this conversation happening. It kind of like fades into their subconscious, and I think that's already happening for Glinda at this point. And so she's really confused by the whole thing. And then the conversation devolves from there. He ends up reciting a poem at them and then says, beware whom you serve. And then the skeleton that he was speaking through vanishes. So the conversation with him was very disappointing. Elphaba didn't get what she was hoping for out of it, a conversation with a reasonable person who cared about his citizens. And so as they board their carriage to head back to Shiz, Elphaba hands the supplies that she got, the food for the journey, to Glinda and says, good luck, and doesn't go back herself. Glinda is very startled by this. And then we have a time jump and we get to see some of her time in the Emerald City. But we have to pause there because it's time to talk about how going to see the wizard went in the movie. This is about where the story starts to diverge from the play and the movie and the book. It starts to get a little bit different here. So as you might recall, Madame Morrible wrote to the wizard after Elphaba's stunning display with the poppies and putting everyone to sleep. Her magic is clearly quite powerful. And so then she gets an answer back, and Elphaba has an invitation to go and see the wizard. And in the end, she invites Glinda along to come with her. And I really liked this touch. Again, it's quite different from how all of this happens in the book. And so I appreciated that first off, they kept Glinda coming along with her. And I liked the cute way where she was like, just come with me. And you can see that like they just have this really tight friendship at this point. They matter a lot to each other. And so she gets invited along. Oh, and while we're talking about the train station, let's talk about the change from Galinda to Glinda. This is a change that happens in the book, actually. It's kind of a throwaway comment where it's like, and then after Dr. Dillamond was murdered, she started going by Glinda, a like half-hearted nod to his mispronunciation of her name, which is also something that happened earlier on in the book. But I really, really loved how the playwriters saw this moment and really grabbed it and latched onto it and made it into something like so funny and so like powerful, talking about like performative activism, where she's like, wait, I have an announcement to make. I am hereby changing my name in solidarity with Dr. Dillamond being taken away from the school from Galinda to Glinda. Like, it's such a funny moment, and it's played really well in the movie as well. I think it's just as good there. It's so funny, and it's such a fun commentary on, like, what kind of activism actually makes a difference, and what kind of activism do people do when they don't really care, and what does that look like? That's totally what's happening there, and I'm so impressed with the playwrights that they saw that nugget in the story and grabbed it and really turned it into everything that it could be, because it really is just such a throwaway comment in the book. Then we get to the Emerald City, and Elphaba and Galinda have one short day in the Emerald City. And oh man, that one short day is really long in the movie. I don't know if you guys felt this way, but they stretch out that scene a whole bunch and like add to the song. And I don't think it really added much. They do add this whole prophecy about the Grimmery, and I don't remember that being in the play. If it is, it's like a line and not a song about the prophecy. But that song is kind of fun because then we start to kind of get like the creation myths of Oz, right? Where there's like the people who founded the area and didn't preserve their language. This is all like story that they have come up with in the play and then further expounded on in the movie. There's a completely different creation myth. In fact, there's a couple creation myths in the book, and they don't know which one's true, which is very fun and true to life. Then we get in to see the wizard. And the form that the wizard takes on is not the one that he takes on in the book. I think it's from that same movie with Judy Garland and the ruby slippers, where it's just that one big head, and that's the form that he takes on in the play and the movie. It's not the one that he does in the book, and I think someone might see him in that form in the OG Wizard of Oz, but all four of them, Dorothy and her three companions, go in one by one to see the wizard and see something completely different every time. So I don't remember if anyone saw him as the giant head. But that's what they see him as. Then he comes right out and is like, oh, it's you guys. Oh, I didn't need to do all of that. He rips the illusion off right away, which is not what happens in the book. But when they do see the giant head, they are both reeling and absolutely terrified and like don't say anything for quite a minute. And so I did feel like they were calling back to that in the book. In the conversation with the wizard as he's trying to convince Elphaba to join him, it is a little bit like the "did she bring you in" moment from the book, where he's trying to get Elphaba to be his adept of sorts. He's trying to convince her of all these things. He's getting her to pick the color of the yellow brick road, which again was already built at this point in the book, but it isn't in the movie. And just like in the book, where Glinda is under the impression that they are going to talk to the wizard about the binding ceremony and stuff, here again, Glinda thinks the conversation is about one thing, and Elphaba turns it around to be about, actually, let's talk about the issues in Oz. Let's talk about what's happening with the animals. So I felt like there was some good parallelism there. Madame Morrible shows up, though, in the movie, which was very out of place based on the book, but they do have her be a second half villain in the play and the movie, and I really liked what they did with her. I think she is sufficiently evil in the book to justify having her be one of the big villains, though she doesn't hold that place later on in the book. Then we have the Grimmery, and the Grimmery is something that we see in the book, the play, and the movie, but they are all a little bit different. I think there's a higher emphasis on the Grimmery in the movie out of all of them. The play, it kind of plays the same role, but it just isn't quite as emphasized in my recollection, but I could be wrong, and we'll get to it in the book. But in the movie, it's in this foreign language that no one else can read. I remember this is the same from the play as well, which it's cool to be like, ooh, it's a book that is hard to use if you don't have the skills and all of that, but like to have it be a language that you've never learned and some people can just read it, that's not how languages work. And you can just say that it's magic and that's how it works, but that's That's not how languages work. Just have the magic be the magic, not the language. Don't change how things work that already work. Meh. That's my little side tangent of being bothered by that aspect. But the spell scene, if you've seen it, you're familiar, is where they convince her to cast a spell on Chistery, the head of the monkey guards, to allow him to fly. And Chistery, I was so excited watching the movie again after having read the book. There's a monkey called Chistery later in the book. It's so interesting the way that even though at this point, the stories diverge quite a bit, they're still pulling as many things from the book as they can to give you those little nuggets of like, we know this story, you know this story, we can enjoy the way that it's the same, the way that it's different. And I thought naming him Chistery was a great way to do that. This, again, is not a scene that exists in the book, but I think it's such an incredible scene. The scene with where she casts a spell on Chistery from the Grimmery, spells from the Grimmery that can never be reversed. And it gives him wings, and it's just this horrifying moment. I loved this moment so much in the play. You're watching him like struggle and flounder around, and then they bring up like another curtain. There's like a couple layers of curtains, and so you can see through a sheer curtain that there's a whole bunch of monkeys that are struggling back behind this cage, and it's just this heart-wrenching, horrifying moment, and we get that again in the movie. I think it was probably more horrifying in the play because it was like in the shadows, it was through this sheer curtain, and then it's just kind of taking place right before our eyes in the movie. And then the wizard and Madame Morrible are like, it's just what we hoped for, eyes in the skies. They'll make the perfect spies. Like, what terrible writing for them to say that right in front of her. And she's like, what? They're spies? This was your plan? Like, why did they say that in front of her? At this point in the story, this is basically when Elphaba realizes that the wizard isn't good and doesn't have any magic. And she doesn't necessarily learn that maybe even at all in the book. At least I don't remember it in the book, but she does learn that he's not good. But I think she already assumed that he was doing bad things, but maybe that he didn't realize how bad the things were. So it's a little bit different there. But this moment is earth-shattering for Elphaba in the movie. And when the wizard says, back where I come from, we know that how to rally people together is with a common enemy, was a bit on the nose, but it is such a true statement, and so I thought it was a great note. When Elphaba discovers that the wizard has no magic, she steals the Grimmery and escapes, and that is the perfect choice for her in that moment, I feel. Grabbing the Grimmery, running off with it. I think that's what a young person would do in that moment. I have some complaints about her next encounter with him in movie part 2, but based on everything that's happened at this point, I think grabbing it and running to regroup makes perfect sense for her character here. As she's escaping, Galinda goes after her. She's told if she knows what's good for her, basically, she'll try and bring her back. But you can tell she's definitely just trying to convince her friend not to do something rash. It feels like a very human interaction. With them singing, I hope you're happy, and how together they could be unlimited and do everything. Then to have her turn around right at the end of that and be like, I can't go with you. It didn't feel very earned in the movie, and I'm not sure what they changed from the play to the movie. It might just be that I have an expectation of a play that we're going through things faster, but the movie had so much time that I expected them to build to it more. It's possible. If nothing changed, that's probably what it was, but it felt a little bit unearned given that she was singing Unlimited with Elphaba right then, and then all of a sudden it's like, I can't go. I felt like she paused and thought more about it in the play, and so I liked that a lot better. She realizes that kind of life isn't for her. She doesn't know how to do that. She's not prepared to make that kind of choice. She can't make that choice on the fly, as it were, pardon the pun. And in the book, I think this choice makes more sense than the other two combined, where Elphaba makes that choice for Galinda. She knows things about Galinda and she knows things about herself, and she makes a choice that she can make and doesn't ask Galinda to make that choice. She says, you're going back to Shiz, I'm not. Peace out, basically. And then we have casting the spell to make the broom float, and we'll get to the broom and its significance in the book, but I did like that the spell occurred to the broom specifically, and there's the broom gets its flowers because it comes up later on in the book. And then Galinda gives Elphaba her cape, and I really loved that moment. Also, that is a shape-shifting cape, because all throughout the defying gravity scene in movie 1, and then all throughout movie 2, it changes in length dramatically from moment to moment, not from scene to scene, from moment to moment. There are moments where she's flying and it's this huge like flag behind her, and it's dramatic and it's pretty and I like it. However, then there are moments where it's like dragging on the ground just a little behind her, and then moments where it's like to her calves and like it's not touching the ground at all. There's even a moment when she's like singing with the animals in part 2 where like it looks like it's legitimately receding behind her, and I feel like if it was gonna be magic, we should have heard about it. So the cape confuses me. But ignoring the cape for now, as Glinda is giving her the cape and they're talking and Elphaba is about to leave, Glinda says, maybe you're not as powerful as you think you are. And I held on to this line because I was thinking about how in the movie, Elphaba's power really is just this raw power, this raw magic that she has in her. But in the book, her power is 100% her. It's her character, it's her grit, her determination, her stubbornness, her willpower. And that is what is innate to her. And she doesn't have all of the magic. She does eventually do a little bit of magic, but it isn't anywhere near the same scale. And I feel like giving her this huge, massive power kind of nerfed her in a way. I feel like it turned her, well, yeah, I mean, it kind of made her into a Mary Sue. I hate to say it. It's just like, she naturally has all these inclinations, these magical inclinations. And we do see the scene where she's struggling to control her powers. And so you could argue that she's like having to learn her powers, but she can do so many things without any effort, like reading the Grimoire right away. And that very much makes her like having all of this power thrust upon her without having to do the work. Whereas I feel Elphaba from the book, she struggles, she wades through the mire, and every ounce of power and ability that she has, she earned tooth and nail. And so I feel, yeah, like in a way, what they changed about Elphaba made us lose a bit of that for her in the story, which is a bit of a shame. But I do like how she came out in the end, if you can ignore the Mary Sue-ness of it all. And then we get Defying Gravity. If you care to find me, look to the western sky. And that is the only nod that we get in the entire 2-movie series, that she's the Wicked Witch of the West specifically. In the book, she goes to the Vinkus territory and lives in the West. But in the movie, she just goes out to the western sky. We don't know where. We don't really have a general concept of the geography. And so I feel like these cardinal direction witches of this direction has less significance in the play and in the movie, and that's fine. It's just a layer of things that are lost. So that's where movie 1 ends. Well, after a really, really long Defying Gravity scene, they draw it out really far. Like, we have Elphaba falling and like looking in the mirror, like the glass reflective windows at her childhood self while she's falling. I was like, man, I know you were planning on drawing out this story, but that was a long sequence. Like, we have the last like 2.5 scenes of like going to the Emerald City, talking to the wizard, and then defying gravity. All of that takes like an hour in the movie, which is just really, really stretched out. And it kind of felt that way, but it was okay. I still really liked it. I have thoughts about movie 2, we'll get there. But that's the end of movie 1. So let's talk about a few aspects of it. First, let's talk about the passage of time and how that is different from the book to the play/movie. At this point in the book, Elphaba had been at Shiz for at least 3 years, if not nearly 4. In the movie, it's really unclear. We're not sure. We know that during their first year, at some point, she casts the spell that puts everyone asleep with the poppies, and then after that, Madame Morrible writes to the wizard, and then she gets a response. We don't know if there's any gap of time between writing and getting the response, but if there isn't a gap, which is how it comes across as a viewer, then this is like 3 months into school. She has not been there for very long. In the play, I feel like we have a higher expectation that between scene cuts, there's been gaps of time, and so when there's lines like, oh, he keeps talking about this event from that day, we automatically project onto a play, oh, it's been a long time then. And so in the play, it felt like it had been longer, whereas in movies, we have an expectation that they will show that passage of time, and since they didn't, it felt like it was immediate. So I'm not sure how much time passed in the play or in the movie, but it felt like they had more time at school in the play than the movie, if that makes sense. After finishing movie 1, my main concern was how they were going to handle the passage of time moving forward. Because as I said, the passage of time felt non-existent in part 1, and so I was really worried that they were just going to start back to back with movie 2 and that it would just like be a story that takes place in like 6 months. Whereas in the book it's like a 50-year long story, and in the play it's at least a decade. Luckily at the beginning of movie 2 it did feel like they'd given us at least 3 years. We have a bit of a glow up with Elphaba. She gets the like dark eyeshadow and lipstick, which I feel a little bit cheated about because I did my makeup to go and see the premiere and to start this video with the makeup that I'd seen from her in mind, which is young Elphaba with very little additional makeup besides just being green. But I could have had sick eyeshadow. I feel cheated. But that's okay. She has a glow up. But I just feel like there's been a passage of time. 3, maybe 5 years if we're being generous. Not a ton of time. And so again, it feels like less time passed in the movie than in the play. Now that we've finished talking about movie 1, let's pause and talk about the book again, because there is a whole part of this book, one of the 5 parts of this book that takes place in the intermission, basically, of the play, which is the gap between movie 1 and movie 2 as far as the movies are concerned. So let's talk about In the Emerald City. So at the beginning of this video, when I did my guesses for how movie part 2 might fill out some of their time, one of the things that I guessed was that they would put in the chapel scene. And here's what I meant by that. At the beginning of In the City of Emeralds, in the book, the part that is told from Fiero's perspective, we see Fiero enter a chapel and he sees someone who looks quite a lot like Elphaba. I mean, obviously, it's Elphaba. She's green. And now remember, have the correct Fiero in your mind. This is book Fiero. So this is face-tatted, Prince of the Wilds of Vinkus territory, a little bit more timid than the gregarious Fiero of the movie, okay? Keep him in mind because he's our guy now, okay? Now, he goes up to her and he's like, Miss Elphaba, it's been so long. And she's like, you got the wrong person. I'm not Elphaba. I don't know you. And he's like, yeah, you are. And she's like, no, I'm not. And he's like, I only know one green person. And she's like, don't know what to tell you. It's not me. And she's trying to shoo him away this entire time, and he will not be shooed. And he's like, okay, fine. How long do you need to pray? I don't know why you're here. I don't know why you're praying at the shrine to Saint Glinda, or Saint Glinda, I think. It's the name that she was named after, but she has the Gilliganese pronunciation. It doesn't matter. He's like, how long do you need to pray? I'll wait outside. Half hour? Do you need an hour? And she's like, fine, I need an hour. And now Fiero, he's no dummy. He's like, she was blowing me off. She's definitely gonna blow me off. So he goes up to one of the nuns and is like, so like, I know that there's one entrance and exit that we can all use, but I'm sure there's some kind of a back entrance for the nuns, right? And she's like, yeah, it's around the back. Like, you can't use it because you're not one of us. And he's like, yeah, no problem. So he goes and waits outside of that, knowing that she is definitely gonna leave from a different exit. And sure enough, before an hour, she sneaks out through the back and he sees her, he's hiding in the shadows, and so he follows her and he's like, where is she going? What is she doing? Why did she leave school? What's she doing now? So he is following her through the streets and he's like thinking the whole time about how, ooh, I've been tracking animals in my youth, and so good thing I have those skills. I can track her now. And he eventually finds her stopped in this like industrial area of the city, and she's like looking toward this one specific building. And he calls out Fabula, which is one of her nicknames, and she turns and then catches herself turning and goes to stop turning, but it's too late. She knows she's turned to her nickname. She knows she's given herself away as Elphaba. She can't lie to him about that now. So he goes up to her, they start talking, and she lets him into her teeny tiny little hovel that she is living in what is definitely not an apartment, but she's living there anyway. And their conversation is so fun and flirty. I have to read some of it to you. It's so precious. I love them. So first, before she lets him in, he says, are you in trouble? And she says, leave me alone, please, please. You're in trouble, let me in. Your trouble. Stay put. It's such a fun little back and forth. Eventually she lets him in. I remembered you as full of delicacy and grace. Did you catch something by accident or did you study awkwardness? Come on, he said. You force someone to behave like a clumping boor. You give them no choice. Don't be surprised. I can still manage grace. I can still do delicacy. Have a minute. Shiz got to you, she said, eyebrows up, but mockingly. She wasn't really surprised. Listen to those graduate school affections. Where's the native boy wreaking that appealing naivete like a well-chosen mutt? ask. "You're looking well too," he said, a bit hurt. "Do you live in this stairwell, or are we going someplace even a little bit homey?" She takes him up to her home. Now, some of what they talk about their lives is something that I forgot to mention when I was talking about him earlier. So he is the prince of the Arjiki tribe in the Vinkus territory, and the culture there is that they marry off their men young at like the age of 9 to like a 6-year-old girl, and they don't know each other, they don't see each other, they don't interact at all until they're adults, but they are, for all intents and purposes, married. And so Fiyero has been married the entire time that she's known him, and he is still married here and has several kids, but their marriage is very much a marriage of convenience, one that they are forced into, and so not condoning any behavior, but the extramarital affair that he has with Elphaba kind of makes sense as like a first love interaction, since that's something he never had. But again, he's married, so what's he doing? But I'm getting ahead of myself. In this conversation, they start talking about why she left Shiz. He doesn't understand why she left them behind. "Well, I was fed up with Shiz. The death of Dr. Dillman vexed me, and everybody grieved and nobody cared. Not really. It wasn't the place for me anyway, all those silly girls, although I liked Glinda well enough." And then he questions her on why she left without a word. And she said, "I loved you too much to keep in touch." And I feel like this comment really sums it up. That was the choice that she made. She cared a lot about these people, and she knew she was going to step into a life that they wouldn't be able to step into with her. And so she left them behind to live the lives that they expected to leave and not get them in danger by what she does. And what is it that she's doing in the Emerald City? Well, Fiyero would like to know. "Have you lived here ever since? For 5 years? Do you study? Do you work? Are you associated with the Animal Relief League? Or one of those defiant little humanist organizations?" And she says, "I've never used the word humanist or humanitarian, as it seems to me that to be human is to be capable of the most heinous crimes in nature." "You're evading again. That's my job," she said. "There, that's a clue for you, dear Fiyero. Amplify." "I went underground," she said softly, "and I'm still underground. You're the first one to crack my anonymity since I said goodbye to Glinda 5 years ago. So now you know why I can't say any more, or why you can't see me again. For all I know, you'll turn me into the Gale Force." He responds rather offended at that implication that he would be part of the Gale Force, which is the Wizard's special ops, basically. They are terrifying, and they remind me a lot of a certain organization in the US right now that is named after a frozen liquid. That's what the Gale Force reminds me of. Basically, in this conversation, she says she can't trust him, they can never see each other again, and she won't tell him what she does. And she only keeps one of those promises. She never tells him what she does, but they do see each other again and again and again, and they start a sort of long-term affair. Again, extramarital affairs, not a fan of, but their romance is in fact rather lovely and very adorable. I love everything about the two of them together. He really sees her. He understands her, and he tries to get to know what she's doing as well, which she never opens up to him about, and eventually he kind of starts to pick it up himself. She's clearly part of some kind of a subversive organization, and he starts becoming more aware of what's going on in the city around him as he's with her. He accidentally sees like this animal family getting treated horribly and dragged into this facility and beaten, and he's like, wow, and no one is doing anything about this. And he thinks about Elphaba and how she's doing something about it, and he wants to talk to her about it, but he feels like he's currently performing the role of a reprieve from everything going on for her, and so he's afraid to bring that up to her. And so he never really gets the truth out of her. We don't know exactly what she's doing, but we can tell that it involves subversive activity to try and undermine the wizard and hopefully fight for the animals' rights to life like the rest of them. Then, around the time of a big festival coming up, Elphaba tells him to get out of the city, get safe. And instead of doing so, because clearly there's something about to happen, he follows her without her knowing. He watches her go into this town square, and he sees someone step out of a carriage. He can see from Elphaba's mannerisms from across the crowd that this person is her mark. She is there to kill this person. And who is it but Madame Morrible? But just as she's about to strike, a group of schoolgirls that shouldn't have even been in school at that time come through and prevent her from doing her job. And she absolutely deflates. And Fiyero, trying to hunt her down, loses her in the crowd. He ends up circling back to the apartment to hopefully see her there, and upon stepping in, he gets attacked by people in the shadows. We're seeing this from his perspective, and he's seeing lots of blood and thinking, I feel like I should be feeling pain. and then it goes black. And that's the end of part 3 of this book, and we have a bit of a time jump leading into book 4, which is in the Vinkus. Elphaba has been despondent for several years since entering her apartment and seeing it filled with blood and Fiyero nowhere in sight. Fiyero was killed on her watch. Ironically, she was found by the nuns at the chapel where she met Fiyero, and she lived as a nun among them as they took care of her. But once she was well enough to be able to go off on her own, they do send her on her way, and she heads to the Vinkus territory. We don't really learn why she's headed to the Vinkus territory at first, but it is so that she can beg forgiveness of Fiyero's wife for being the reason that he got killed. That's right, Fiyero is dead. Just like Dr. Dillamond, people are dying left and right in this book, so much more than in the movie or the play. And it's funny because I'm so mad that he was killed, but like, it's this sad, beautiful, tragic event too. And so like, unfortunately, like my tragedy-loving heart loves that he was killed, but I also hate it so much. And I'm stuck in this tug of war of like how beautiful and tragic it is, basically. And also, I kind of hated that losing him made Elphaba lose herself for a bit. I kind of understand what they were doing here because this is basically the only person that ever saw her and loved her for who she was, despite of everything. And so then losing him kind of made her lose herself, but she really lost herself. Like, she didn't speak for years. She spent an entire year despondent and not even knowing what was going on, like no memory of that year. And it felt a little bit like man dies and girl loses personality, which sometimes happens in books. Now, her not remembering anything for a year is actually key because when she leaves the Abbey, she leaves with a little boy. And that boy turns out to be her and Fiyero's child. But she doesn't remember giving birth to him or even being pregnant because she was so in and out as far as consciousness goes for that year. And so she spends most of the book kind of in denial or just oblivious to the fact that this is her son. Only in kind of the depths of despair in her story does she really admit to herself that this is her son. This is her and Fiyero's son. And so it's this really interesting aspect. She has like all of this regret around him, and that forces her to remember the regret that she has about this kid too, that she hasn't really been raising as a child. He's just kind of been following her around. I don't know. I think it's a really interesting concept. Is it super well executed? Honestly, I think it's pretty well executed. But just this idea that like she's in denial about this kid for most of the time and like thoroughly convincing herself. Because remember, now we are in part 4. We finally get the book from Elphaba's perspective. Now, on the passage between the Emerald City to the Vinkus territory, we see several things happen. First off, she has this boy named Lear with her, who she's in denial about being her son. She also befriends this dog called Killjoy, and it is her constant companion. Killjoy is her like beloved pet. And then at some point she starts to tend some bees that she finds and brings them with her. And then she also saves this small monkey from Killjoy. Killjoy was like hunting on the leaves and she sees that he's got something, so she gets it from him. And it was this baby monkey that he's gonna eat. And she names it Chistery. Another thing that we need to note before moving on is that when Elphaba finally gets to the castle that Fiyero once lived in and meets his wife Sarima and her kids and Sarima's sisters that live with them, she attempts to beg Sarima's forgiveness for being the reason that Fiyero died and her children are fatherless. But Sarima knows that Fiyero died in a love nest. She knows that's where his body was last seen, though the body is never found. And see, she'd always thought that the person that he was having an affair with was Galinda, this person that he always spoke highly about in school. But now that Elphaba has shown up with clearly a very important message that she wants to say to her, she has a sneaking suspicion that it could have been Elphaba. And she shuts Elphaba down. She won't let her say what she's seeking forgiveness for at all. She keeps silencing her. She won't let her say it because she is denying her that closure. She sees that Elphaba really needs this forgiveness, and so she won't let her say a word of it, kind of as her last repayment for what it is likely that Elphaba has done to her. And because of this, they're stuck in this weird stalemate where Elphaba refuses to leave until she gets forgiveness, and because of mountain hospitality, Sarima puts Elphaba up For years, they just kind of integrate into each other's lives. Elphaba becomes part of this household, and it's so funny. Like, it's such an interesting thing that it just sort of like happens naturally, where it's like, well, she's still here and we're all going about life, and then she starts interacting more and we're still going about life, and obviously we're never gonna kick her out, so she's just part of the household now. It's so funny. It's such a weird, interesting situation that's so foreign to my culture, but it's such a fun culture to write. Now, you may remember that I mentioned in the book there is a push and pull with Elphaba and Fiyero and someone else that wasn't Galinda. It's this push and pull with Sarima. We don't really see it when Fiyero is alive. We just see Elphaba and Sarima kind of having this push and pull over Fiyero, over his memory, in retrospect after he's gone. We really see that in the stalemate that Sarima locks Elphaba in by saying, you know, you can't ask forgiveness of me, I won't even hear you out. And that kind of creates this constant like back and forth of discord over a man. I think it's really interesting that the playwrights saw this dynamic of back and forth between Elphaba and Sarima and wanted to preserve that and put it in their story, even though they clearly didn't have time to do the entire Vinkis plotline. They trimmed up the story considerably to make it a musical, and so that's something that they dropped, but they still kept the love triangle and just implemented it in other ways, and I think the way that they did it made their story incredibly strong, so I'm really glad that they kept that aspect, even if they had to change it entirely to do so. Okay, one last thing before we get into movie 2 that I think is super interesting and paradoxical is that Gregory Maguire, the author of Wicked, seems to know so much about the dynamic that he writes, but also nothing at all. Let me explain. He writes a culture in the Vinkis of an incredibly harmful patriarchy, one that really oppresses women. See, in this culture, not only are children married to each other at 6 or 9, but that only happens for eldest daughters. Sarima was married at 6 and then eventually met her husband, but her younger sisters didn't get married that way. In fact, her younger sisters joined Fiyero's household when Sarima got married and sort of became his property. And based on this culture, you can only get married as a younger sister once your older sister is married. But the catch is, if the oldest sister's husband dies, then she counts as unmarried again. And in this instance, that happened. Fiyero died, and so now Sarima is unmarried, so all of her sisters are also unmarried and can't marry until she gets married. That's the culture he wrote, okay? And then he describes Sarima's sisters as incredibly catty and manipulative and cruel. They're constantly either trying to marry Sarima off to some random person or to undermine her in her own home. The fascinating part about this is that this is exactly what women in these sorts of situations where they have no power, they have no rights, they have no agency would do. They would try and grasp at power in what little ways they are afforded it. If you're unable to get married and therefore unable to be anywhere near the top of a household where you can have some control over your own life and what you say and do, then you're going to try and find that power and control over your own life in some way or other. If you can't get near the top of the totem pole as the head of a household, or at least the mistress of a household, then you're stuck at the whims of your sister instead. You have no control over your own life. You can either bow to that authority and have no control over your own life, no power whatsoever, no agency, or you can try and get some. You either have to maneuver a situation where you can leave the household, as in marry Sarima off to someone else so you can get married off, or try and wrestle control in the household that you find yourselves in. Gregory Maguire knew exactly what happens in that sort of situation. He wrote it perfectly. But in the book, he talks about them like they're wicked and catty and cruel and spoiled. And you could say that this is a narrator's perspective. Maybe Elphaba just doesn't like them and doesn't understand. But that's not the case. Remember, we have a nearly omniscient narrator that has a voice of its own. And it isn't describing them in this way from Elphaba's perspective. No, it is simply just describing them. Clearly showing at least a narrator, if not an author, intent. It's truly baffling. Either he followed this kind of situation closely enough that he was able to absorb what happens when oppressed people seek the power that they can get and just wrote it subconsciously without even realizing it, or he knew exactly what he was doing and just pretended he didn't for some reason. I'm baffled. Okay, but that's enough for now on Elphaba's time with the Vinkis in the book. Let's talk about the movie part 2, Wicked for Good. Alright, the movie that just came out, Wicked Part 2 for Good. let's get into it. It opens on a scene of Elphaba flying over the yellow brick road being constructed. They have enslaved these like woolly rhino things to build the roads. This opening made me so excited for what they were going to do with the extra airtime in this second movie. So excited because we get to see her subversion in action. We get to see what she's been up to. She goes and she attacks the people who are beating the woolly rhinos, and she frees them and lets them run off into the wild. We get to see Elphaba being subversive. We get to see what she's specifically doing to try and undermine the wizard. I cannot wait for this. I was really excited about it. But unfortunately, I do think that a little bit of my excitement was misplaced because that is not how they use the majority of the runtime. They do give us a little bit of it here and there and add like a whole scene. They add this scene and a different scene, and so I thought they did a pretty good job, but they didn't use the time the way that I would have. And while we're talking about it, let's talk about my guesses that were incorrect. We do not get a chapel scene with Fiyero, alas. It doesn't really fit into how the story is going. I just really wanted it to. I wanted that part written back into the story. So we get a little bit of subversion. We don't get Fiyero in the chapel. We don't get any more of the Wizard of Oz than we had originally, which I was really surprised by. We get about the same amount of the OG Wizard of Oz story as the play had. And the fourth thing that I said might happen is showing her time with the Vinkus people, and that didn't happen at all. So I was only kind of right on one count. Alas. But while we're on this beginning scene, I was so confused. Why did they invent woolly rhinos? There's several times in this movie and a little bit in the first movie where we get these random, like, invented animals, these kind of brand new creations. And why? If it's already a movie about animals and control over them and enslaving them, why did we make new animals? I don't know, that was really baffling to me. After that scene, we see Madame Morrible announcing things about the Wicked Witch being wicked and the Emerald City and the surrounding towns being flooded with propaganda posters against the Wicked Witch of the West. We also see Madame Morrible giving Glinda the bubble so that she can float around in it. It's a great scene. I thought Glinda was very cute in that scene as usual, trying to like make the bubble big and then pop it over and over again. That was really fun. And we have confirmed that Glinda in her adulthood can't do any magic, at least not yet. But Madame Morrible does give Glinda a pep talk about how she needs to be a beacon for hope for the people in this dark time. And so we kind of see that's the role that she's been shepherded into, being a beacon for hope because times are hard and she feels that's her responsibility. So in her magic bubble, she goes to the opening of the Yellow Brick Road, which I had a question. Why was the ceremony for the opening of the Yellow Brick Road held in Munchkinland? And like during this, Glinda puts down a cornerstone, like the center stone of the Yellow Brick Road in Munchkinland. But she literally announces like now all roads lead to the wizard. But clearly, wouldn't the center of it then be in Munchkinland? That part confused me, but it's not important at all. I was just like, huh? And in this scene, Fiyero comes up and Madame Morrible announces him as the captain of the Gale Force, which I saw that and I was like, what? I literally cackled in the theater. I was like so baffled by this. Now, again, I'd seen the play, but Gale Force hadn't stuck in my head. So then reading about the Gale Force in the book and having them be reminiscent of what's going on in America right now, and having Fiyero be like, oh yeah, he's the captain of the Gale Force. I was like, what? Fiyero would never. My face tattooed Fiyero would never. Again, the story is different here. This is the play and the movie. This is not the book, but Fiyero does this and he makes it very clear as he talks a little bit to Glinda that he is on the Gale Force so that he can be among the first to find Elphaba and hopefully treat her better, maybe save her, than the other people who might find her would. So he's being very intentional about this, but it was still, I was shocked to see that he was on the Gale Force. But in this announcement, Madame Morrible announces that Fiyero and Glinda are engaged. And he's like, oh, we are? And Glinda is like, yes, the wizard and I thought it would be a good surprise for you. Ignoring how chaotic that is. I thought this was an interesting moment because I felt that, and this is probably how the play went on this note specifically, it probably played out the exact same way, but this felt like it was giving Glinda too much agency. This is going to be a weird take, okay? Usually I'm all for women having agency in stories, but I felt in this instance Glinda had really been shepherded and kind of forced into this role when Elphaba left her behind. She had the pressure of the wizard and Madame Morrible to do their bidding, and also she'd been convinced to be this beacon of hope for the people in a hard time. And so she'd been kind of like forced and shepherded into this whole and like this role that she can play, but then being like, oh yeah, I was just chatting to the wizard about surprising you with our engagement, made it feel like she was too involved, like she was more buddy-buddy with the wizard than I had felt that she'd been watching the play. And that might just be time from the last 2 years convincing me that it was different than it had been. But I have some other notes along this line that I think are genuine differences between the play and movie. During this whole thing, the Wicked Witch is brought up, and the Munchkinlanders talk about how her soul is so dirty that a bucket of pure water would destroy her. And Fiyero is like about to charge at them, and Glinda like holds him back and has like a hushed conversation with him behind this thing about how like, you can't do that kind of thing. Do you think I like hearing them say this sort of thing? And he's like, oh yeah, I guess I can't say anything. And I just thought that was like really, really bad writing. I mean, perhaps for the sake of a play where they literally do not have that much time to show this kind of story, but like with a movie where you do have more time for that, that was a really weird choice. Like if he's in the Gale Force for the sake of protecting Elphaba if he finds her, then you would think that he would care about his cover and not blowing it and not just like punching a random munchkin for saying like she's got a dark soul, you know? It felt a lot like bad exposition almost. Obviously it wasn't exposition, but it was trying to show us something in a way that didn't make sense. During this ceremony, Elphaba flies over and writes, "Our wizard lies," in the clouds above them, and Madame Morrible immediately scrambles them with her weather powers and writes, "Oz dies," and is like, "The Wicked Witch of the West is trying to kill us all, spreading more terror. And around this time, we get Couldn't Be Happier, and again, I am struck with just how incredible the music in this musical is. I love that song. I love the way that they show Glinda's turmoil, where she's getting everything that she's ever wanted and her heart isn't in it. It doesn't feel like she thought it would feel. It's such a powerful song. I'm pretty sure right after this we jump to Nessa and Bach. And this plotline with Nessa Rose is so fascinating. I really, really like what the playwrights did here. We see Nessa Rose, who after her father died became the governor of Munchkinland. And Bach is sitting there with her discussing things and is very clearly still living out the role that he was living in school. He hasn't had the guts to tell her that this isn't the life he envisioned for himself. He doesn't care for her in that way, and she is so clearly still head over heels for him. And someone comes in, a servant named Averick, I might add, again another name from the book popping up in unexpected places, because that's the Gilly-Canese person that I think they kind of mixed Fiero's character with when making the movie Fiero. Anyway, they come in with a law that they want her to sign, that she's being requested to sign by the Emerald City, that would enact the travel bans on animals in the Munchkinland territory. It's been enacted everywhere else, and she mentions thinking about doing it, and Bach is so upset. He's like, what? Why would you consider that? And I love that we get a little bit of book Bach. We get Bach, who cares about the animals and is trying to fight for them, at least just a little bit here in the movie. But the reason that Nessa says to Bach for considering signing that document is that she doesn't want people to think she's just like her sister, that subversive wicked witch. And it is in this conversation that Bach says, I think it might be time for me to move on. Nessa does not take this very well. She did not expect it. She is not okay with it. And as he leaves, he says, this won't be the last we see of each other. And she very ominously says, oh, I know. It makes all of us uncomfortable hearing that. I took notes on the movie after I left because I didn't want to be that one person taking notes in the movie theater with my phone light on, and so if I get the order of these things wrong, just bear with me. But what I think happened next is that Elphaba has this scene where she sees animals have dug a hole through the yellow brick road that is supposedly leads out of Oz, and she sees them fleeing and tries to convince them not to go. First off, she says that the country outside of Oz is like like nothingness, which was interesting because that's not how it's described in the book at all. The areas around Oz are kind of deserty in a lot of places, but there are civilizations out beyond that. There's other countries that they're sometimes talking about. So I thought that was kind of weird to be like, oh, but there's nothing out there. You'll never survive. That was just kind of a weird note to add. But in their defense, when they show the nothingness, they show desert, which is kind of like in the book. So whatever. But in this new scene, Elphaba sings a song called No Place Like Home, or at least I presume it's called No Place Like Home because that's the refrain. And the song itself was kind of weak, unfortunately. It just didn't have that power to it that the rest of the soundtrack does. Really, like, it's quite forgettable. I would have to look it up on Spotify to even remember anything about it besides the fact that she sings There's No Place Like Home. But the concept of it, I think, was good. This is one of those moments where I was like, oh yeah, this is a movie that was released in 2025. Because I felt like the concept of this song was, hey, like, even if America is not in a great place right now and a lot of us are disappointed with what is happening, don't just flee and move to Canada. Stay here and think about the people that you'll be leaving behind. Like, one of the lines was something about like, don't leave because you'll feel bad for the people that you've left behind that you didn't fight for or something. I think overall that's kind of a good message that like you should be trying to stay and make the place that you live better for the people there rather than just moving on. I think that's an important message to have, but I also think in some situations there's justification for just getting out, and the animals in that situation definitely had justification for just getting out. Like, things were getting pretty bad in Oz. Not nearly as bad as the book. In the book, there are animals that are, like she was saying when she approached the wizard, being cannibalized, as in like they're just eating animals now, like proper animals, and like using them as farm equipment and whatnot, when that, if you're going to put it in the same context as would make sense in our society, given that like they were professors and stuff, it's very much like slavery. Okay, so that's what's going on in the book. It's not quite as bad, but it's still quite bad in Oz in the movie. After this, we get a scene of Bach trying to board the train to go to the Emerald City. He just found out that Galinda is getting married to Fiyero, and he wants to take one last chance to tell her about his feelings for her and hopefully sway her. So he tries to hop on the train, and he finds out that starting that day, the governor, Nessa Rose, banned all Munchkins from leaving Munchkinland without express order from the governor. And wow, he knows instantly what that means, and it's just devastating. You see the devastation on him. I think I might have these scenes a little bit out of order because something happens before we go back to this, but this is the next scene I have written down. We see Nessa Rose at her governor's desk, and Bach sitting there pouring her tea, very much in a manner of servitude. He's back in the same position as before, but he's acting far more robotic. And he's even in a gray outfit that is very clear he doesn't want to be there. His heart is not in it. He feels trapped. Bach leaves the room after pouring her tea, and Nessa Rose is left alone, but the door to the balcony swings open. So she goes to see why it was open, and Elphaba is back in the room behind her. So she confronts her sister. This is the first time they've seen each other since Elphaba went underground and is now called the Wicked Witch of the West. Nessa is so upset with Elphaba. She's so upset that she hasn't seen her, specifically that she didn't come to their father's funeral. Elphaba says, why would I come? He hates me. Because in the movie, that's what we've had portrayed to us. So that is the story, that her father hates her. Why would she go to the funeral? And Nessa says, well, I needed you. And Elphaba says, you've never needed me. Nessa Rose responds, well, I need you now. And this felt very petulant to me. I think it's fair that in your teenage years, one might be hyper independent, especially if you're in a wheelchair and you're trying to navigate life all on your own. You don't want people babying you. You're a teenager, you're a young adult, you want to be doing things yourself. And then with a few years of experience, you might have changed your opinion. However, the way the scene played out made it feel very much like, well, I never said I needed you then, but you should have just known that I needed you now. It feels very petulant, and I think it feels petulant on purpose. I think that was very intentional. Nessa Rose tells Elphaba about how much she misses the way that things were, how happy she was, the way that at that night at the Ozdust Ballroom, she felt like she was walking on air. She felt like Bach loved her and cared about her, and she can't have that anymore, and she begs her, please make me feel that again. And this is not how it happened exactly in the play, so I don't know if the line, feeling like I was walking on air, is how it happened in the play. I think maybe not. But in the movie, she takes that concept, Elphaba does, and casts a spell to make her feel like she's walking on air and lifts her out of the chair through a spell that she enchants on the shoes. And this is different from how it happens in the play, because in the play they cast an abled person as her, so she stands up out of the chair and the shoes help her walk on her own. But in the movie they cast a disabled actor, and so instead of having her walk, since that's something she can't do, they had it be like she feels like she's walking in air, and so she's walking through the air. So they sort of changed that scene a little bit. I liked the way that they did it. I was very curious how they would approach having a disabled character play Nessa Rose when she is eventually supposed to walk, and I thought that this was a very interesting approach. I think it was a good one. I liked how they did it. While she's walking through the air, Buck comes in and sees this, and she's like, look, I feel so incredible. And he's like, wow, your spirits are cheered up. Maybe this means you can let me go. I lost my heart to Glinda a long time ago, and I need to tell her how I feel. And Nessa Rose hears this and falls back down into her chair. She is so upset. She goes over to the Grimory and she says, well, you'll lose your heart to me now, and starts casting a spell. Elphaba comes over her shoulder saying, you're saying it all wrong. Don't do this. You don't know what you're doing. You've never seen the Grimory before. You know nothing about this. But she casts a spell that makes Bok's heart shrink. And the only way to save him, Elphaba has to turn him into a tin man. She sends Nessa out into the hallway, and she's feeling distraught about Bok potentially dying. But then she comes out and says he'll be okay. Nessa Rose says, is his heart okay? And she says he won't need one now. And then she leaves. Not before asking Nessa to join her in her quest, but Nessa very rudely refuses. Then Nessa turns to go check on Bok, and he smashes his way through the door with an axe. And he is a tin man, and he sees himself in the mirror and is so upset at Nessa. He approaches her with the axe like he's going to attack her, but she yells, no, it wasn't me, it was Elphaba, it was Elphaba, it wasn't me. And so then he goes off to get his revenge on Elphaba. And that scene was so horrible. I mean, good, but like horrible, you know? It's a little bit different from the play. In the play, because she can walk as a result of the spell that Elphaba casts, Bok is like, oh, so you don't need me anymore. I'm gonna dip and tell Glinda that I've been in love with her all along. And she's like, no, I'll make you love me, and cast the spell, and everything else about it is basically the same. But this story, oh man, this plotline is just so wild. It's such a interesting and heartbreaking storyline. To have Bok be so cowardly and not tell her anything about how he actually feels, and then to have Nessa latch onto that so strongly that she will not let him go, is just, it's such a tragic timeline. It's the darkest timeline of people who don't communicate, basically. Now, let's talk about how this happened in the book. It is very different. As I mentioned, the Nessa Bok timeline isn't a thing that happens in the book, but some of these details do hold true. See, I mentioned that Elphaba goes out and lives in the Vinkus. After a while, her nanny comes out to find her. She discovers that she had stayed as a nun in the monastery and tracks her to the Vinkus from there. At some point, Elphaba gets a note from her father saying, hey, Nessa Rose became the eminent Throp in your absence, since that was the lineage that would have befallen Elphaba from her mother's side. Again, her father wasn't the mayor, it was another family line. Elphaba didn't take that line. She went into hiding, and so Nessa Rose became the eminent Throp in Elphaba's absence, and apparently decided to secede. The Munchkin lands seceded from Oz. And so her father's like, hey, you should come help out with this, please. And because her father wrote, she goes and checks on them. And her father's like, I knew you would come if I wrote. And she's like, yeah, but like, what's going on? And he's like, oh yeah, a lot of bad things have been happening. Like the Gale Force has been raping Munchkin women. Lots of people are being attacked. Animals are being treated horribly, but they burnt down a couple churches, and that was the last straw for your sister, see? So ever the religious zealot, I see that was the last straw for her. So she decided to take Munchkinland and secede from Oz. And as the eminent Throp, the highest position in Munchkinland, she's become the ruler of Munchkinland. And she is ruling with an iron fist. Man, things are wild. Elphaba goes to talk to her sister, and she like hardly ever gets a conversation in with her. The first conversation that she has with her, Nessa's like, how could you abandon me at Shiz? You left me with Madame Morrible. And then she's like, well, I had Glinda for a year, but then she went off and graduated. Forgetting that Elphaba would have also went off and graduated, but she's like holding these years that she didn't have Glinda or Elphaba against Elphaba when only one of those would have mattered. She's acting very spoiled about it. But I mean, fair, your sister went into hiding and faked her death. Like that's hard. But the whole time she's ordering Elphaba around, she very clearly hasn't changed at all. The next time that Elphaba talks to her is when she's receiving Munchkinlanders and their quarrels. So there is a woman who comes forward and says, I have a servant that I work with, and because all the animals have been shipped off, like she's the only worker that I have left. My other male human workers are like conscripted in the army or something. So I've just got this one woman, and she and I run this farm together, and she's fallen in love with Nick the woodchopper. I don't remember. He's got more to his name than that, but whatever. She's fallen in love with this guy, and she's gonna go off and marry him, and I need that to not happen. Can you enchant this axe so that it cuts off his leg so that he is no longer a suitable partner for her so that she can stay and work on my farm? And first off, wow, there were a lot of jumps there. Second off, Nessa Rose says yes and accepts in payment for it a sheep and 2 chickens. And Elphaba is just like, what? First off, what? Second off, hold up. Third off, what? And she's like, Nessa, are you doing magic? Aren't you anti-sorcery? Isn't that a whole part of your thing? And she's like, oh, like this doesn't count, basically.
Corruption is only bad if I'm not involved. But if I'm part of that corruption, I'll defend it.
So she like learned sorcery and just somehow like works it around her worldview. And she enchants the axe to cut this guy's leg off and then accepts chickens and a sheep. And Elphaba's like, you're accepting animals as payment? These are animals. Like, what are you talking about? Who are you? Like think about it in our society. This would be like dealing in human trafficking as payment. What? She's baffled. And so she goes out to the place where the chickens and sheep are taken. There's a cow that she talks to in there who's like, a lot of animals have just chosen to not speak because it's just easier, so they probably won't answer you, and sure enough, they don't. But the interesting thing about the enchanted axe is if you read The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the original book, then you'll remember that the Tin Man was formed by, he had an axe that chopped his leg off, so he went to the Tin Man to rebuild him a leg, and then he kept going, and then he cut his other leg off, and so he had the tinsmith make him another leg, then he got his arm, then he got his other arm, and then he got his head, and he just keeps replacing these parts with tin parts. Then eventually he hits his chest, and he just gets a new chest, and then he becomes the Tin Man, and he misses having a heart, because back when he had a heart, he was in love with this serving girl. So we're following the story like really beat for beat in the book, where the play and the movie take a lot of their own inspiration in a different direction. And I really like what they came up with. I think the story around Bach is far more moving than this one enchanted axe moment with Elphaba and her sister Nessa Rose. I think that's as long as Elphaba stays with Nessa Rose and then she goes back, so let's get back to talking about the movie. After leaving Nessa Rose, Elphaba goes to talk to Glinda. Glinda is preparing for her wedding and she sees Elphaba and tries to convince her to let her take her to the wizard and talk to him and convince him she knows how to talk to him. Let me fix this for you. After her conversation with Glinda, Elphaba goes to talk to the wizard face to face for some reason, which was baffling to me. I did not understand this choice. This is one of the scenes that was added in, and I don't know why. First off, Elphaba approaches him like way too casually, not nearly threatening enough. Like she's the one with all the power, like magic power. She knows that he doesn't have magic, and she's just like, dude, stop it.
Stop it. Get some help.
And he's like, meh. And it's like, what? What is happening? Then Glinda shows up, and Glinda and the wizard sing the most bizarre song that I have ever heard in my life. It makes zero sense in context. Well, okay, so first off, the wizard says, like, oh, no matter what you tell them, they're not going to believe you because we've propagandized them and they want to believe what they want to believe. And so even if you tell them the truth, even if I tell them the truth, they will make it make more sense in their own brain because they want to believe that, which is true. That's how things work. This is one of those moments where I was like, I think you've said a true thing. It doesn't make sense in what was happening right now, though, because then we lead into this whole song about it. I don't remember anything about what the song is about other than I felt like I was having a psychedelic fever dream. My friend Rachel, who was with me at the theater, she was like, I feel like this scene is when a director is trying to depict that the characters are all on drugs. And that is exactly what was happening there. There was psychedelic lighting and they were all spinning in a circle and smiling and laughing. And they were leading Elphaba around and she was letting herself be led around. And they were like, you should come back and join us. And Elphaba is like, yeah, maybe. That's literally, she's like, I'll consider it. Oh, but remember how I cared about animals? Yeah, if I join back with you, maybe you gotta let them go or something. And what? What are you joining back with them for? What were they convincing you to do exactly? What about their weird song was convincing you to leave your entire life's mission? What was she being sold on? It's an afterthought that they should care about animals. Wouldn't that be what they led with, since they know that's what she wants? Wouldn't it just be conceding and be like, yeah, you win this debacle, this battle that has been happening? Worse still, on how none of this makes sense, is that the wizard is like, oh yeah, you're right. Maybe I'll just let the animals go. Here, have a key to the monkey cage. And they open up the monkey cage together and Chistery flies down and she's like, hey, so you're free now. And then they all just go away. And as they're coming down out of this tunnel where he's kept the monkeys, okay? It's so creepy and it's haunting and they're coming down and it feels very threatening. And I was like, okay, surely they're building up to her getting imprisoned or something. And so all the monkeys are going to come down and pin her to the ground and they'll be like, you're strong, but not as strong as 100 monkeys or something. That's what I thought was happening. But no, they just fly away and he just walks out of the room. And then Chistery comes back and is like, hey, look over there, and opens up this secret tunnel to where the wizard has a whole bunch of animals locked in cages, including Dr. Dillamond. And she's down there, freaking out. The wizard realizes that she's down there and goes in and is like, hey, it's not what it looks like. Calm down. Everything is going to be okay. Some animals can't be trusted and need to be locked up. And she's like, yeah, I've made up my mind. She breaks all the locks off with her magic and tells him to run, or maybe tells the animals to run. At any rate, everyone is running. The wizard takes off. He gets stampeded by all of these animals that then stampede through the wedding of Glinda and Fiyero. Poor Glinda. Her wedding gets absolutely destroyed right as it was about to start. And Fiyero pulls her to the side so that she doesn't get trampled. Anyway, okay, let's pause there, okay? What? Why? Huh? Why? At what point? Why did Elphaba trust the wizard at any point and was like, yeah, he's just gonna let them all go? Why was she surprised that he still had some animals? Why did he just let some of the animals go? What happened? Why did that happen? Huh? I hated that scene so much. It ruined everything for me. I don't know exactly what happened there in the play because I don't remember a wedding. Something else was in that spot. I could be wrong. It's been 2 years. I don't know. But because of that stampeding animal scene, we did get to see Madame Morrible's face smashed in cake. So I might say it's at least kind of okay for that reason. Back to the story, though. Because of the stampede through their wedding, Fiyero realizes that Elphaba's in the building, so he rushes up to where the wizard is, assuming that's where she will be, and she is. He walks in on Elphaba, absolutely, choking the wizard with her broom, with her magic. She's not doing it with her hands. And he's like, help. And Fiyero goes over and helps him, and is holding Elphaba at gunpoint, and then turns on the wizard, and tells the wizard to get in the cage. And this part was weird to me because, okay, obviously I knew Fiyero was going to join Elphaba's side. Oh, and he sent all the other guards that he went up there with off to go get water to get rid of Elphaba, which was a hilarious way to get them out of the scene. But he tells the wizard to get in the cage that is behind him by saying, unless you want everyone to know everything about you, but we just had this huge song about how no matter what you tell them at this point, they'll believe what they want to believe and they want to believe in me. So why did he accept that threat? Was it just the gun in general? It felt like we added an extra threat that we had just made obsolete through this extra scene. We created a plot hole where this threat no longer mattered. I don't know. The scene with the psychedelic singing with the wizard was a disaster. Anyway, the wizard gets locked in a cage, and Fiyero goes over to Elphaba, and Glinda comes in. And she's like, what's going on? And he's like, I'm going with Elphaba. And she looks between the two of them, and she says, what? The two of you all this time? And the heartbreak on her face, oh my gosh, could have ended me. And Elphaba's like, no, it wasn't like that, because it legitimately wasn't like that. They had like one moment, but you know, she said, I'm not that girl, and just assumed that was true. But Fiyero had really loved her all along. Oh man, that love triangle really, really gets me. I think about it like all the time. It's so heart-wrenching. And on the day of their wedding, Fiyero leaves Glinda behind. And oh, poor Glinda. She's just like beside herself. She's just kind of like in shock about it. You know, you can see the tears and just the like far off expression. And behind her, Madame Morrible comes up and unlocks the cage that the wizard is in. And they're talking about, how can we smoke her out? How can we get her back? She was just here and we let her go. And Glinda is just kind of listening and is like, her sister, use her sister, spread a rumor that she's in danger and she'll come flying. And you can tell that she is just hurt and like lost to the world in a lot of ways. And like, this is kind of a moment where she wants to get revenge. At least in the play, it was definitely played off as like, she's really angry. And she's like, all right, let's catch her, kind of a thing. In the movie, she felt just like a little bit absent, was kind of the concept. And then as she leaves to go sing her half of I'm Not That Girl, which was, the reprise of that absolutely gutted me. Anyway, after she leaves, the wizard and Madame Morrible are like, obviously a ruse, like a rumor isn't going to be enough. Gotta go put her in danger. Glinda didn't mean to actually put Nessarose in danger. And I think that is points for her, but the idea is points against her. And I think that that's the balance scale that we're supposed to be feeling as the audience. And on the other hand, Elphaba and Fiyero are so like ecstatic and enthralled and in love. Like they didn't think that they would see each other again. They didn't think they would have this time, and they do. And it's such a cute scene. She shows him her little tree hovel house thing, and he's looking around, and it's a very like heartwarming and also starting to get a little bit sexy scene. And the only reason I bring up that part of the scene is in their like heartwarming, sexy, like starting to get things on moment, Elphaba is like hugging him, and they start like floating in the air, and he's like, whoa. Now hold on to that, okay? She's lifted him in the air, okay? Just hold that thought with me, okay? After all of this, she has a dream that there's this tornado that endangers Nessarose, and we see on the other side of things, Madame Morrible casting this weather spell and summoning this tornado in a house from another world. And this scene was immaculate. I don't remember it from the play specifically, but it was incredible in the movie, okay? Michelle Yeoh looked stunning. Her dress was incredible. It was everything you want from an evil villainess scene. Now, Elphaba saw this tornado and that it was happening, so she goes to see what has happened. I think she's trying to go and help, but she gets there too late. And we see Glinda waving happily at Dorothy as she and her dog skip off down the yellow brick road wearing the slippers. And Elphaba lands somewhere after that, right as Glinda turns around and lets her smile fall and cries about Nessa being gone. And Elphaba over her shoulder says, what a touching display of grief. And you can tell that she doesn't believe anything about Glinda's act. And Glinda is actually baffled by this. She's like, what are you talking about? Elphaba points out, isn't it convenient that we have a weather-powered evil lady and Nessarose was crushed by a house? And Glinda's like, no, like these accidents happen. And she's like, really, an accident? And then Elphaba goes to say goodbye to her sister Nessa, and somehow she knows the shoes are gone and is like, how could you give her the shoes? Those were the last thing I had of my sister. And this kind of starts this fight back and forth with them of like taking things that don't belong to you, about Fiyero and about the shoes, and just years of pent-up resentment. And it turns into this wrestling match between them, and I really liked this scene. I thought that that it was like such an interesting, like, and funny and silly way to like explore the pent-up anger that they've had against each other for years. And it was silly and it was fun, and then it's not fun anymore when the gale force shows up as Glinda has Elphaba pinned to the ground and take her from her, and like, sorry we were late, thanks for catching her for us. And Glinda's like, whoa. Elphaba's like, what, this was a trap? And she's like, no, that wasn't how I meant it. Let's pause there briefly. Let's talk a little bit about the book. As I said, they're getting to be quite different, so it's kind of hard to string together these thoughts. But I talked about how Elphaba went to see Nessa Rose in the book, right? And she learns about the, like, casting the magic spell on the axe that eventually creates the Tin Man, okay? Now she goes and talks to Glinda while she's in that section of Oz. In the book, the house falls on Nessa Rose just the same, as it does in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, in the book, in the movie, in the play. It all happens the same. But what happens around it is obviously very different, because the context is very different in the book to what we've seen. So, Elphaba shows up when she finds out what has happened to her sister. She talks a little bit to her father after she finds out that her sister is dead, and she talks to Glinda. See, Glinda was there right away in the book as well. She was there because she was doing business with her husband in Munchkinland, and so they happened to be around. And she does have skill with magic, and there was this young girl from Kansas who seemed very confused, and, well, Glinda's looking around her, and she sees that, well, Munchkinland seceded under the rule of Nessa Rose, and now Nessa Rose is dead. So Oz has already been talking about trying to repatriate Munchkinland, and so it is very likely that the wizard will try and attack. So she's like, this poor little girl, I've got to get her out of here. At least this is what she tells Elphaba, and that's really all we have to go off of. So she gives her the shoes and sends her on some fanciful tale about going to the wizard, him helping her out, just so that she is not there in the event of a war. She says it would do no good to have this little girl stuck there. And Elphaba's like, why would you give her the shoes? They were the last thing I had of my sister. And now it's important to note that in the book, they had been charmed as well, but they weren't charmed by Elphaba, they were charmed by Glinda. Glinda cast a spell on the shoes that allowed our dear Nessa Rose to be able to walk on her own without help, because remember, she could walk before, but not very well, and now she's very sturdy on her feet, and it really allowed her to come into her own as the eminent Throp and not feel like she needed as much help. Obviously, she still needed some help, not having arms, but it gave her a lot of confidence. And she told Elphaba that she would give her the shoes when she dies. And now they're the last thing that she has of her. How could you give this away? She asked Glinda. And Glinda's just like, I didn't think you were into shoes. Which is such a, like, baffling, like, absent-minded, not paying attention to other people thing to say. Now, another piece of information here is that the cruelty of Nessa Rose is there in the book, and it's there in the play and movie. In the play and movie, it's in the form of, like, doing anything to keep Bok at her side, but in the book, she has been an absolute tyrant of an eminent Throp. And now that she's dead, people have already graffitied everything around the area that she died, saying like, she walked all over us, now we'll walk all over you, that sort of thing. So she was not well liked at the end of her tenure, which was not that long. It was probably a couple of decades at maximum. I would say we're probably at like close to 50 years old for Elphaba and Glinda at this point in the story. And there's also something painted about like she walked all over the Munchkins in the East or something, and she had started to be called the Wicked Witch of the East. And as you might imagine, we have a Wicked Witch of the West, and Glinda is the Good Witch of the North. That is the roles that people are starting to fall into. And in this moment of talking about Nessa Rose and why she gave away the shoes and all of this, they do talk a little bit about that interaction that they had with Madame Morrible all those years ago. Elphaba asks Glinda if she remembers the binding spell and what she said they must do. And Glinda really just doesn't take it seriously. She's like, oh, that silly old farce, that theatrical event, like, that was no big deal. Meanwhile, Elphaba has been thinking a lot about it because she's gained a lot of influence and notoriety out in the West, and Glinda has gained a lot of notoriety in the North, and Nessa Rose gained a lot of power in the East. Now, I haven't really touched that much on Elphaba's influence in the Vinkus, but ultimately she has been at this point dabbling with magic, and she's been trying to study anatomy more, and something happened to Chistery where he got injured, and so she started fixing him up, and in the process was like examining his muscle combinations and like sewed wings onto him and all of his descendants. So now like she's got the familiars of like Killjoy the dog and all of his progeny, and then she has all these monkeys that she's been sewing wings onto, and she has these bees, and she has ravens, and so she's really starting to be a witch, as it were, and really take that on for herself. She's like, you know what, like maybe that's what I am. Maybe I'm just a witch out in this country. Nothing has really ever worked for me, so maybe I'll just do things, you know, I'll just live my own life. Having like a main goal in life didn't really work for me. And so this is kind of the purpose that she's pursuing, is just her own stuff, her own world, her own animals and familiars. And she also found the Grimoire. Up in the attic among Sarima's books, she finds this old book that's like in a kind of similar but not quite the same language, and like sometimes it's harder to read and other times the letters like re-scramble and it's easy to read. So sometimes it's like a completely different language and other times it's not. And she discovers that it is a book from another world. It's the Grimoire, the keeper of all of the magic spells too powerful for our world, the world that the wizard comes from. She has started to dabble in the Grimoire, but hasn't used it a whole ton, but that is part of what has been getting her magic going. Oh, and I promised that I would come back and touch on the broom. So let's follow up with the broom. One of Sarima's daughters, so Fiera's daughter, has this whole interaction where she borrows Elphaba's broom because it's hardier and she's sweeping with it. And then she like sees it kind of like jump toward her at one point when she's reaching for it, and she's like, what? And so she's like starting to mess around with it and figures out that like she can get it to fly. So she flies around on it before Elphaba ever does. And Elphaba sees her and is like, come down, like you're gonna hurt yourself and all of that. And then she's like, has this broom had magic all along? And she's been carrying this broom with her from place to place ever since she got it from a very withered old nun in the monastery called Yakel. She's like, has it had magic all this time? And she starts to train with it and realize that she can fly on it. There's magic here. And that's kind of what starts her magic journey. And she finds the Grimoire and all of that afterward. Okay, let's circle back around to the movie for good part 2, okay? Where we left off, Glinda had tackled Elphaba and then the Gale Force had captured her. Fiero rushes in. See, the flying monkeys had been listening when Elphaba was talking to the animals about why they should stay and fight for freedom. And so when she released them, they had good feelings toward her. They had goodwill toward her specifically. And so while she is gone checking on her sister Nessa, Fiero runs into the flying monkeys and they take him to her. And with the help of the flying monkeys, Fiero saves Elphaba. He holds Glinda at gunpoint and says, unless you want the good witch, Glinda, to die, let her go. And then he tells Elphaba, go, get out of here. And she flies off without him and he sends the monkeys behind her to take care of her. Okay, let's talk about that, okay? Remember how I said hold on to that thought about how Elphaba had lifted Fiero into the air before? Why didn't she take him with her? Because you could say, oh, you know, you can only fit one person on a broom. I don't care. She's lifted him into the air before. Maybe it's only hovering a little bit, but hover him a little bit that way and have him not get captured. Or, I don't know, the flying monkeys could grab him and take him with you. I do not understand why Fiero got left behind. I didn't notice this when I was watching the play. It just worked for me when I was watching the play, but watching the movie this time, I'm like, what? He didn't need to get caught. And I feel like the power of Elphaba in the movie is like super off balance. Honestly, everyone's powers are kind of weird throughout time. Like Madame Morrible never uses her weather powers to get the flying witch out of the sky. And when Elphaba leaves Oz, or the City of Emeralds, at the end of the Defying Gravity sequence, she flies away with so much power, she knocks out all the power in the City of Emeralds. But like, her sabotaging the wizard is like so lackluster, and she like doesn't even use magic when she's face to face with him. But then like she has all this power to like levitate people like her sister in the first movie, but she can't lift Fiyero out of harm's way. I don't know. I just feel like the magic doesn't always do the same things, and people don't always have the same powers from moment to moment. But anyway, so she flies off to the castle that Fiyero had just told her that she should go to because there's all these secret passages. So she flies off to a new hideout and immediately pulls out the Grimoire and starts casting a spell because she's just left Fiyero behind where he had turned his back on the Gale Force and gone with the enemy. He's now a traitor and he's in their hands now. There's this tearful sequence as she's casting a spell from the Grimoire and doesn't really know what she's casting, but she asks that his flesh doesn't tear, that he doesn't bleed, and that he will never die. This sequence is so dramatic and so like tearful. Now, here is where the play and the movie start to diverge quite a bit. Okay, editing Emily here again. This is an important note. Right after filming this, I talked with some friends who know the play much better than I do, and apparently I was wrong about a lot of things. What I think happened is I walked out of the play slightly dissatisfied with the ending and kind of rewrote it in my head, and it's been 2 years, and I forgot that I made this up. So, anything that you hear me talk about how the play and the movie are different, I'm probably wrong. Pretty sure I'm wrong. What I need you to do is when you hear me say things about how the play and the movie are different, just transpose what I say about the play to my own personal fan fiction for how I feel like it would have been better if it had ended that way. Okay? Okay. Because in the play, she knew exactly what she was casting, at least I think so, or at least she saw it as it was happening, even if it wasn't what she meant to do. But in the movie, we don't see that she's turning him into a scarecrow. Which, spoiler, she is. He's getting like put up on a fence post, and like we see all the like corn imagery and wheat imagery, but we don't see him actually turn into the scarecrow. She has no idea if her spell worked on him or not. In the play, she knew what she did. She knew that it worked, but she also knows that a spell from the Grimoire can't be undone, and now this is forever the role that he is in, forever the body that he is in. And this is when we get the no good deed goes unpunished sequence. And it is such an incredible song. Again, it's part of that same song where she's casting the spell. And it's so good. It's so good. Because yeah, he saves her life and then nearly gets killed for it. Like no good deed goes unpunished. And this is kind of the moment where she decides, she's like, I can't save him. Or at least I can't know that I saved him. Everything good that I've tried to do has come to nothing. So I'm gonna live for me, kind of a thing. All good intentions be damned. Now, there's a moment like this in the book too, but we kind of have to hold off just a little bit to get to it. So hold the thought of no good deed goes unpunished. Moving forward in the movie, Dorothy's crew get to the Wizard of Oz. And in the movie, we see her meet the Tin Man, or at least that she has the Tin Man with her, but we see that she has the lion, but we don't see Fiyero as the Scarecrow. We just kind of see his feet. And I was like, why are they not showing him to us? It took me a while to realize that they were trying to obfuscate his identity from the audience for some reason. I just thought that was a weird choice, especially because they're adapting such a famous play where I feel like that is one of the things that people will remember most from it if they've seen it, is that Fiyero becomes the Scarecrow. But at any rate, Dorothy and co get to the wizard and they are seeking an audience with him. And the wizard is going full alcoholic mode where he's just like, I don't want to do this, and he's just drinking. And Madame Morrible is like, okay, but we can use them. And I would like to ask you, why? Why would they be useful to you? Again, talking about like the balance of power as it has been and has not worked throughout. What makes Madame Morrible think that this random little girl is going to have effort against this powerful witch that she has not been able to have any success against? What? There's no justification for that. It doesn't make any sense. So I have no idea. But at any rate, they're like, okay, yeah, now go and kill the Wicked Witch of the West, little girl, before we grant your demands and bring back the broom so that we know you did it. And I don't really understand that choice. That is the same choice that's made in the play. I guess I overlooked it at the time. But I don't know why they thought that would be successful. All right. Let's get back to the book. Let's follow up on No Good Deed. But first, before we do that, let's talk about the origins of Dorothy's crew. In the movie and the play, the Tin Man is Bach. Fiyero is the scarecrow, and the lion cub is the lion cub that they saved that is now scared of everything. And his story in the play and in the movie is like, if you'd let me fight my own battles, if you hadn't taken me from the only home I'd ever known, I wouldn't be so scared. Sorry, my chair is so squeaky. Now, before we get back to Dorothy and Co., let's talk a little bit about the shoes. Okay, in the book, the shoes have been enchanted by Glinda, and they've clearly had some kind of a major, like, emotional influence on Nessarose, not just a physical one. So Elphaba becomes kind of centered on this concept of these shoes and the power that they have, and she is so furious that the shoes are going to get into the wizard's hands. And so she's trying to do anything to get to them before they get to the wizard so that she can get the shoes off Dorothy. And when Dorothy comes back out from talking to the wizard with the shoes still on, she is so confused. She doesn't learn until later when she's talking to Dorothy that Dorothy can't get the shoes off herself, so the wizard was unable to get them off. That's something she doesn't know. And so she's like, why wouldn't he take these shoes? They're clearly so powerful. He's going to use them to harm Oz, and we need to protect the shoes from him, and I need to keep them and keep them safe. And then she hears that the wizard has asked the bounty of Dorothy and Co. of taking out the Wicked Witch of the West. Oh my gosh, I forgot an entire plot in the book. We'll get back to the shoes. When Elphaba learns that her sister is dead, she goes and talks to the wizard and asks him about what had happened all those years ago with Madame Morrible, and he doesn't even remember. He's like, oh, we were always cooking up some kind of a concoction back then. And this is when she learns that he doesn't have any real power of his own, and all of that sort of goes down. We also learn that he's there to get the Grimoire. Okay, let's back up and talk about the book. After Elphaba heard of Nessarose's death, and she had the conversation with Glinda about the shoes, something snaps in Elphaba, and she decides that after all this time, she isn't sure if their lives have been controlled and pulled by strings by Madame Morrible. Glinda made a point in their conversation about it that if they were living according to Madame Morrible's wishes, they didn't get it quite right, because Elphaba was going to be sent to Munchkin Land, not Nessarose, and Nessarose was going to be sent to Quadling Country, and instead Elphaba is out in the Vinkus territory. Despite all of this, she still feels this anger in her of her life feeling like it's been controlled by other people, and also that she failed in her one mission, the mission that she was striving to achieve to undermine the wizard on the day that Fiyero died. And so she goes to make good on an old promise, and she goes to kill Madame Morrible. She gets there, she finds the new head of Shiz, and she's directed to where Madame Morrible is now, retired, still an evil, evil woman that makes everyone who worked under her terrified of her. And she goes to kill her, but she's 15 minutes too late. The old Madame Morrible is already dead, but she still strikes her. And then she heads into town and tries to tell people about it, that she's killed Madame Morrible. She feels like she needs the world to know that she did this, even though she knows that she didn't do it. And so she tells a couple of people, and it's clear they aren't going to take her seriously or take the news anywhere. So then she goes to Averick, her old friend from back in school. And he was only tolerably likable back then, but now he is far less so. And he lets her in, and she's like, yep, I Madame Morrible, and he's like, cool, yeah, whatever, join our party. And they're like playing drinking games and like not taking the world seriously at all. And she's like, I just told you I'm a murderer. And they're like, yeah, I don't care. But eventually she realizes, okay, well, at least they're gonna tell people. And so that's good enough for me. And so she leaves and goes back to her home in the Vinkus territory. So when she hears that Dorothy and her company have made it to the wizard and back out, and the shoes are still in Dorothy's possession, she does not understand this. But when she hears that the wizard won't grant their wishes until they've killed the Wicked Witch of the West, that she understands. Because she just put a target on her back. She just told everyone that she killed Madame Morrible, a thing she had meant to do a long time ago, and someone who was a longtime ally of the Wizard of Oz. Now, as she's waiting for Dorothy and her company to catch up to her, Elphaba does a lot of thinking, and she feels like maybe she knows this crew. maybe she knows who is traveling with Dorothy. These are the things she thinks to herself. She thought one afternoon inexplicably of the baby lion cub taken from its mother and pressed into service in Dr. Nicodick's lab back in Shiz. She remembered how it cowered. She remembered the fuss she had made about it. Or was she only glorifying herself in hindsight? If it was the same lion, grown up timid and unnatural, it should have no bone to pick with her. She had saved it when she was young, hadn't she? And this is a moment where we start to see that it's been a long time, and Elphaba is really good at denial. So she's really good at telling herself how things are, whether or not they're actually that way. She actually wasn't the person who carried the baby lion out. It was a couple of the other girls. They confused her, this band of Yellow Brick Road irregulars. The Tin Woodman was a hollow TikTok cipher, or an eviscerated human under a spell. The lion was a perversion of his own natural instincts. She could deal with TikTok clockworks. She could handle animals. But it was the scarecrow she feared. Was it a spell? Was it a mask? Was there merely some clever dancer inside? She could give the lion a history. Think of him as that abused cub in the Shiz Science Hall. She suspected that Nick Chopper was the victim of her own sister's spite and magic, casualty of the enchanted axe. But she had no way to place the scarecrow. She began to think that behind that pained cornmeal sack of a face, there was a face she would know. A face she had been waiting for. She lit a candle and said the words aloud. Fiyero didn't die. He was imprisoned and he escaped. He is coming home to Kiamo Ko. He is coming home to me. And he's disguised as a scarecrow because he doesn't yet know what he will find. So she takes one of Fiyero's old tunics and gives Killjoy and his descendants the smell and sends them off to go see if they can bring these Yellow Brick Road travelers and if they can discover if it's Fiyero underneath. But when they get close, Nick Chopper, the Tin Man, cuts down her dogs one by one. And this part follows the original Wonderful Wizard of Oz beat for beat, because that's exactly what happens. The witch sends dogs after them, and Nick Chopper cuts them down one by one. And now she wheels around in her room, whipping pages of the Grimoire back and forth. She recites a spell, did it wrong, did it again, then turned and tried to apply it to the crows. She tells them, go, look with your eyes more closely than I can. Pull the mask off the scarecrow so we can see who he is. Get them for me. Peck out the eyes of Dorothy and the lion. The time is coming when we will be reunited, all of us, with the help of the Grimoire. The wizard may topple at last. And this is the no good deed goes unpunished moment. When she is trying to bring her beloved Fiyero home and they kill all of her dogs one after another. She says, that's it. Okay, well, let's try and bring them back whatever way we can. She sends the crow to take his mask off and hopefully find Fiyero underneath. And the crows are all killed by the Tin Man as well. But after all of her crows are killed, she sends her bees. She tells the bees to sting Dorothy and the lion, and she watches and sees as, just like happens in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the scarecrow covers Dorothy and the lion with straw from his own body, and collapsed on the ground is his empty clothes. And she sees through her telescope that there was no one inside the scarecrow. I needed it to be true with her, that Fiyero was somehow in there. But he wasn't. He's dead. He's long dead. Oh, it's so heartbreaking, and her heart gets broken all over again. And this is the moment where she really loses herself. And she is just outraged that everyone she's loved is gone. And now people are coming to kill her for no reason. And it's this stupid little girl and these shoes that should have been hers. And she has truly lost herself. After all of the bees fail, the witch sends her best, Chistery and his many winged monkey friends, after them to bring Dorothy and the lion here. She says, don't bother with the scarecrow and the Tin Man. There aren't even people in there anyway. They'll make it here eventually. So she has them pick up those two. She brings them into her house and she confronts Dorothy over the shoes. Dorothy isn't letting her get a word in edgewise, and the lion has suddenly figured out how to be brave and is trying to defend her. So she has Chistery take Toto away to haul him off to danger so that the lion will go chase after that so she can talk to Dorothy. She tells Dorothy to take the shoes off, and Dorothy explains to her, I can't get them off. There's nothing I can do to get them off my feet. Elphaba tries to get them off herself and is completely unsuccessful. She's digging through the Grimoire trying to figure it out. All the while, Dorothy is talking her ear off, and she's like, didn't you come to kill me? What are you doing? And she's like, well, I was sent here to kill you, but I came here to beg your forgiveness for killing your sister. And this moment Like, Elphaba absolutely shatters. She is so frustrated. The forgiveness that she was never offered by Sarima, who was killed by the Gale Force in the gap of time that I didn't cover. She's now dead. She will never get forgiveness from Sarima. And here is Dorothy knocking on the same door, asking for the same thing. So she tries not to give it to her. And it's a bit of a kerfuffle, and Dorothy ends up setting Elphaba's broom on fire. The broom that she has had with her for years. She's distressed by this and trying to deal with it, and then her skirts catch on fire. And Dorothy grabs a bucket of water and says, "I'll save you," and splashes her with it. And in the book, remember, water does hurt Elphaba. So we get the end of the scene where Elphaba feels burning all over, and then darkness. And Dorothy, distressed, having not meant to have done any of that, but not having the broom to bring back to the wizard to prove that she had accidentally killed Elphaba, she grabs the strange green bottle that was by the grimoire and takes it back to him. And when the wizard gets that green bottle back in his hand, he realizes what it is. It's the bottle that he gave to Melina, the Munchkin, when he was traveling through that area, and Elphaba was his all along. And that is roughly where it ends. We then hear that he hopped in his hot air balloon and got out of there just moments before the castle was ransacked by rebellion against the wizard. And so, despite Elphaba having been unable to do anything about the wizard in life, in death, she did lead to the end of the wizard's reign over Oz. I think that this ending is good in like a poetic way, where I'm like, wow, I have a lot to think about now, but I don't like have the warm fuzzies for it, if that makes sense. Like, I think it is an interesting way to end a book, but I really wanted it to end less disappointing. Basically, Elphaba's life comes to nothing. Like, everything that she fought for, she loses. Everyone she loves dies. And she doesn't achieve the things that she wants in life. She doesn't even succeed in killing an elderly woman. Everything that she had tried to fight for, she failed at. But after she's gone, her goals are achieved without her. It's definitely like a classic tragedy in the way that it is told, which makes sense because it's the story about the villainess who loses, who dies. And so I think for what it is, it's really good, but it definitely just leaves you going, oh, at the end of it. And so what the playwrights did with the story is just so good. I love the ending. Okay, let's get back to how the ending plays out in the movie and play. They're very similar, but there's a little bit of difference between the two of them. Again, pretty sure all of these differences were hallucinated by me. After the wizard sees Dorothy and co. and sends them after Elphaba, Glinda hears that they are sent to kill Elphaba. And this is the straw for her, where she decides, I'm leaving this behind. I'm gonna go help Elphaba. She puts a cloak on over her fancy dress and rushes off to go and warn her. It kind of makes sense as like a split-second decision, but Glinda at this point is someone who has power. She has the power of the people, the sway of the people around her, and she decides to cover that up and go in secret to go and help Elphaba, when it's possible, far more likely, that she could help her with her power, with her influence, going as herself rather than going in disguise. I guess you could argue that the song, like, they'll believe what they want to believe kind of an idea, like, it wouldn't have helped. Maybe people would have just thought that Glinda was now on the Wicked Witch's side rather than the Wicked Witches actually misunderstood. So there's that argument, but I did feel like that was kind of a weird choice, but I could understand it being a split-second choice of someone who's concerned for someone else. When she gets there, Glinda tells Elphaba what's going on, and Elphaba tells her, don't clear my name, no matter what. In the play, they sort of make this decision together. She's going to fake her death, and she needs Glinda to act like she's died and never clear her name as someone who's a good person, but instead use her influence as being seen as the good person to change Oz for the better. And in the movie, that conversation doesn't happen. To be clear, it doesn't in the play either. I just wished it had so hard that I thought it did. She just says, don't clear my name, and Glinda's like, why? I don't want to do that. But she sends her back to her old life, but not before she shoves her in a closet and has her watch what Glinda believes to be is her demise. Before this happens, we get the song For Good, which will never not make me cry. I had streaks in my green makeup in the theater listening to that. It is such a heartfelt moment, and that song is just so profound that I have no notes for that song ever. However, it did feel like Glinda hadn't really done that much in the movie version to redeem herself by that point, where they're apologizing to each other and such. Because that conversation doesn't happen where Glinda is brought in on what's going on, she doesn't really get enough time in the conversation to say to Elphaba that she's leaving everything behind to be on her side now. It's very rushed, and so for good kind of comes too soon, especially for my friend Rachel, who has never seen the play before. She doesn't know the story. This is her first time through. She was like, why is she forgiving Glinda? What has she done to deserve this? So I think maybe they ended up rushing something here despite having all that extra time that they filled elsewhere, which is odd to me. In the movie, no, they won't see each other again, but Glinda doesn't really know all of it. She doesn't know that she's about to believe that Elphaba is dead, but she does watch what she perceives as her being killed by Dorothy in the bucket of water. And Dorothy takes the broom back to prove to the wizard that she's killed Elphaba, and Glinda sobs watching it happen. And then she goes back and, in the wake of her friend's sacrifice, realizes what she needs to do. And so she goes back and she tells the wizard, you're gone. Yeah, no, you're just gone. And like, she doesn't really have any real power backing her, but she does show him the green elixir bottle and it's like, she was your child, and that kind of breaks him, and she's like, yeah, you're leaving. And he's just kind of like, yeah, I guess I am. The wizard even asks Glinda, where will I go? And she's like, I don't care. You're just leaving. And he leaves. He takes the hot air balloon and goes. And then she shows Madame Morrible out the window. Oh, look who's leaving. Now, there's a lot of vacated cells recently, a lot of cages. You'll have your pick. And she has Chistery haul her off. Chistery and the other monkeys haul Madame Morrible off. Now, here's a moment we need to have, which is that Madame Morrible is really powerful. She pulled a house out of another world with a massive tornado. One time, at least. And Glinda doesn't have any magic. So why did she back down? Elphaba gave the Grimoire to Glinda. And at the end of the movie, she starts to learn how to use it and gets some real magic, and we get some fulfillment to that arc. We get a whole extra scene early on in the movie where we see that she wanted to have magic, and it's not a very useful scene in my opinion, but it shows that she's always wanted magic, which is something we already knew from her time at school. So I don't know why we needed that scene, but she gets to fulfill that now through using the Grimoire. Why didn't that happen before she sent Madame Morrible off? Because why did Madame Morrible listen to her and not just like tornado her or something, or lightning strike her, or something weather related? It felt very out of order, those things, where she just like, oh, she got confidence, so now she can threaten powerful people and it's just gonna work. Now in the play, nope, not in the play, in my rendition. Because Glinda knew that Elphaba's death had been faked, and that she'd basically taken the mantle on herself to continue the fight that Elphaba was fighting, and fight for freedom in Oz, and undermine the wizard, and take care of people. And so that's what she's empowered to go back and do. In the movie where she doesn't have that agreement laid out, they're kind of just lucky that she takes that as motivation to do those things, because that wasn't a prearranged thing. Elphaba just kind of dipped and was like, hope she does good. And luckily she did, which was nice. And then Elphaba still being alive and Fiero being the scarecrow are both set up as surprises for the audience, which again, I think is a little bit weird of a choice. We see all of the secret tunnels and how they fake the death in the play, and so people who know the play will already know they're alive, and it's quite a well-known story, so I'm not sure why they tried to have a big reveal. I don't think it's necessarily bad, I just think it's an interesting choice for such a well-loved story to then try and make it a plot twist. But Elphaba and Fiero walk off into the deserts outside of Oz together to make a life somewhere else. And that is the ending that I transpose over the book, because it's so much better. She gets to live a life with Fiero, and he's not been dead the entire time. Oh, it's so sad the way that the book ended, so I transpose that onto it when I think about it. Okay, this is getting a little confusing with my mix-up here. Clearly I have a habit of writing over things that I don't like as much in stories that I spend a lot of time with. After watching the play, I must have decided that it would have been better if Elphaba had talked to Glinda, if she had told her her plans, if they'd planned it together. And I agree with myself, I think this would have worked really well, because if she had done this, then she would have had a guarantee that Glinda would step up and make the changes that Elphaba Elphaba hadn't been able to do in her life because of the way she'd been painted. And not only that, but it also wouldn't be nearly as tragic for poor Glinda to first be stood up by her husband and then perceive herself seeing her friend pass on. Other than that, I absolutely love the ending of the musical. So much so that when I'm in a particularly romantic mood and thinking back on the book, I sort of transpose part of that ending over the book as well. I imagine that Fiyero had survived in the form of the Scarecrow and that he and Elphaba had been able to run away together into the deserts beyond Oz and live a happy life together. Unfortunately, that is not how the book ends. I do want to talk a little bit about Glinda's agency, where in the movie specifically, it's been a minute since I've seen the play, so I can't speak to it as well, but in the movie, it really feels like she was more complicit than I remember her being with a lot of the bad stuff. I'm not talking specifically about the house falling on Nessa Rose or anything like that. She came up with a bad idea at the wrong time and bad things happened. But she felt really complicit in the movie, like she was really a part of the enterprise, especially with the scene with the wizard and the psychedelic spinning around in circles and stuff, where I don't remember her feeling that way in the play. She's kind of just trapped, and Glinda feels very trapped in a lot of moments in the book too, so I feel like they gave her too much agency in the movie, such that her turnaround didn't feel earned. The singing for good and forgiving each other felt like when Elphaba said the "will you forgive me" line in the song, my friend Rachel was literally like, no, you don't need to apologize. Like, she said it far too loud in the theater. We both had a couple of moments of making weird noises in the theater, like when I cackled at the thought of Fiyero joining the guard, because this isn't something I super explicitly mentioned, but his wife and children were killed by the guard that they had him join in the play. And so when I put that connection together, I was like, what? A little bit too loudly, so I'm sorry to everyone else who was in the theater with me and my friend Rachel because we were too loud, but only, I think, once each, so please forgive us. Oh, one last piece that I need to wrap up from the book is that the Grimoire, as I said, is from our world, and the dwarf that was carrying around the time dragon and the nun named Yakult who gave the broom to Elphaba were both the people who were keeping track of the Grimoire and keeping it out of the wrong hands, and the wizard was the wrong hands. So we're meant to believe that there were people kind of on Elphaba's side, but like more removed. And it just didn't super feel like that. Like, there was this thread of like connections through it all, but it wasn't woven in such a way that it felt like an aha moment. Instead, it felt like a huh moment. So that was something that didn't super land for me. Okay, that is all. That is Wicked, the play, the movie, and the book. Let's talk about my reviews of all of the above. All right, the musical. The play was incredible. No notes. I had no notes walking out of that theater. Editing Emily again, this is such a lie. Apparently I had such a big note about the ending of the play that I rewrote it in my brain. But other than that very, very specific note about the ending of the play, I had no notes about the play. Loved it. Enjoyed it. That was also 2 years ago, so I can't give you a very good review of my specific thoughts other than loved it, okay? So now let's talk about the movie. Part 1 was incredible. There were these little references to the book here and there that got my hopes super high for how they might use the extra time in part 2 to weave back in parts of the book. And they didn't necessarily follow through on that, and I think I had too high of hopes, and that's my own bad. But at any rate, the first movie was incredible. It was really good storytelling. The changes that they made so much sense based on the medium that they were telling it in, both from the changes made into the play and then made into the movie. My only complaint for part 1 is how they drew out the last like 2.5 scenes to be an hour long. I already complained about that, but it was excessive, especially at the point of Elphaba falling off the building and seeing her childhood self. It got really, really long. But up until that, it was just like a little bit annoyingly long, and then that was the moment where I was like, wow, this is long. So I wish they hadn't drawn it out as much as they did. Even if they were gonna split it into 2 movies, they didn't both need to be 3-hour movies. They could have been 2-hour movies. So that's my notes for part 1. It was incredible other than the way that they drew it out. Now part 2. Part 2 had more issues for me. They added in a lot of things that weren't in the play, and a lot of them created issues with the story. Like the scene with the wizard, the psychedelic dancing around with the wizard scene That didn't need to be there. If that wasn't there, I would have a completely different view on this movie. I would have such a higher opinion of it. Just based on that scene alone, I walked out really disappointed from the theater. But I wouldn't say I walked out overall disappointed. Just that scene really weighs on me. That said, the story did follow the play pretty well, and those key moments and songs really hit incredibly well for me. It seems like that is maybe not the case if you haven't seen the play, but for me, everything hit the way I wanted it to. The ending with Glinda did fall a little bit flat, and dropping the ball in the final moments of a movie really is the death sentence to a good story. So where I would give movie 1 full 5 stars, I would give movie 2 a generous 3 stars. Now let's talk about my review of the book. First off, I loved it. I have spent a lot of time in the world of Wicked in making this video, and I haven't even edited it yet, so we're gonna be spending even more time in there.
Girl, you don't even know.
And I think that this was an incredible story to be spending this much time in. The book was so interesting. It has that 19th century flair to it, again, even though it wasn't written in that time period. And it has all of this wit and charm that you see in the play, and it draws out and gives us so much more world building. I think it's a great supplement to the play. I think that the play made a lot of good changes and created this incredible music that is just unforgettable and so moving. But the book on its own, it does really hold its own, especially as a tragedy about a villainess and how her life got there. I think it's an incredible story. However, I do think that the timeline as she's traveling to the Vinkus and living in the Vinkus territory, it draws on way too long with a lot of details that we don't need. They're interesting enough, but I don't think they're necessary, and so it really pulls out the story longer than it needs to be. And ultimately, again, I would rewrite the ending if I could, even though the original ending does make me think a lot. I would love for Elphaba and Fiyero to still be alive, especially my diamond face tattooed Fiyero boy. I love him so much, and he's dead. But anyway, with all of that in mind, I give this book 4 stars. Let me know if you've seen the play, if you've seen the movies, and if you read the book in the comments section below. I really want to discuss these, especially let me know if I forgot anything from the play or told anything incorrectly. It's been a minute since I've seen that, so I would love the feedback in that area. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give my video a like and subscribe to my channel. I make a lot of fun and goofy videos about books. I do reviews. I make occasional bookish crafts. I talk a lot about fantasy and romance, so if any of that piques your interest, definitely stick around. I've also been thinking about doing more book to movie comparisons, so if that's something that interests you, let me know in the comments below, and I may pursue a few other movies in the future. I've made a couple of autumn themed videos recently, one about books with pumpkin spice in the title, and another about cozy fantasy, so if those pique your interest, definitely go check those out. Feel free to follow my Goodreads, Storygraph, Instagram, etc., all of which are Emily at Midnight, except for TikTok, which is Emily_at midnight, I think. It's linked in the description below. Have a wonderful day, treat people with respect, and pick up a book. This has been a long video for you to watch. It's also been a long video for me to make, and I just wanted to make a quick shout out to my husband for spending as much time as he did editing this video. He took my roughly 5 hours of raw footage and chopped it down to the 3.5 hours that you see now, and I went through and added things after that, so he did definitely the bulk of the work on this. He also helped me come up with ideas and went to the movie with me and has just been overall so supportive on this project. So I wanted to say thank you to him. Trust me, without him, this video wouldn't exist. What do you expect from me? I'm green.